Hello. Welcome to Untold Travel Stories. Today, I'm going to take you on a journey across the world, from one end of the earth to the other, told in a way you have never heard before. Dim the lights in your room, lean back, and let the sound of this video carry you. When I woke up, I heard the wind, nothing else. No engine, no voice, no familiar hum of a city in the distance, just the wind. And the sound of wind passing over a living city is not the same as the sound of wind passing over an empty one. I learned that on that very morning. When I opened my eyes, there were cracks on the ceiling. A ceiling I didn't recognize, a room I didn't recognize. I sat on the edge of the bed, and for a while, I just looked at my hands. They were my hands. Of that, I was sure. But the person those hands belonged to, I wasn't so sure about him. I had a name. What? And now, I could feel the empty space that name had left behind. The way your tongue searches for a tooth that has been pulled. But the name itself was gone. I walked to the window. I pulled back the curtain, and I saw Istanbul. The Bosphorus was still there. The water was still flowing, maybe a little slower. Or maybe I was just imagining that. But the city I thought I knew, was no longer there. The towers were there. The minarets, the bridges, everything was in its place. But inside all of it, there was no one. How did I know? I don't know. Maybe it was the absence of smoke. Istanbul used to wake up every morning wrapped in a thin layer of smoke, rising from tea kettles, from simit bakeries, from the smokestacks of the first ferries of the day. That morning, there was no smoke. The sky was naked, and beneath that naked sky, Istanbul, for the very first time, was alone with its own skeleton. I reached into my pocket. There was something inside. I took it out. An old pocket watch, silver, but that dull gray that only years can leave on silver. I opened the cover. The hour hand pointed to 11. The minute hand to 4. The watch had stopped. But when I held it to my ear, and this is hard to say because trusting your own senses in this world is not an easy thing, I could still hear a faint ticking. The ticking of a watch that had stopped. It wasn't possible, but it was. I put the watch back in my pocket, and from that moment on, I never took it out. I left the room. I went down the stairs. When I opened the door of the building, when I took my first step onto the street, there were papers under my feet. Newspapers, flyers, pages torn from a child's school notebook. The wind was dragging them from one corner to another, and the sound they made as they were dragged was the loudest voice of an empty city. I bent down. I picked up one of the papers. It was a supermarket flyer. Tomatoes, 2 lira 90. Bread, 1 lira 75. The sale starts this Monday. I didn't know which Monday. I didn't even know if Monday meant anything anymore. I let the flyer go. The wind took it back, carried it away. I started walking toward Istiklal Avenue. Don't ask me how I knew the way. I seemed to know Istanbul. But what I knew was not a memory. It was an instinct. My body knew certain streets, certain corners. My mind did not. It was as if I had borrowed the memory of someone who had lived in this city years ago. I stopped in Taksim Square. The square was completely empty. Even the pigeons were gone. That felt strange to me. Pigeons always stayed. Even when people left, pigeons stayed. But they weren't there. As if they had known something, heard something, and left. Or maybe they had never been there at all. Maybe pigeons were something I had made up. A detail left over from a book I had read as a child. In the middle of the square, there was a suitcase, open. Inside, folded shirts, a pair of shoes, a toothbrush, and a family photograph. In the photograph, a woman, a man, 2 children, all of them smiling. In the background, the sea, maybe Antalya, maybe Bodrum, maybe nowhere at all. I placed the photograph back on top of the suitcase. I didn't take it. That photograph wasn't mine. And in this world, whatever I had left, whatever was still mine, it had to be only mine. I didn't have the strength to carry other people's memories. I kept walking. Istiklal Avenue used to be crowded even in the earliest hours of the morning. Now, there were only shop windows. Most of the store doors were open, as if no one had had the time to lock them. In the window of a jeweler's shop, the gold was still there. No one had taken it. That made me think, if people had been running, some of them would have grabbed the gold. Even in panic, human instinct, but the gold was still there, as if people hadn't been running, as if they had just let go. The difference between running and letting go is enormous. A person who runs still carries hope. A person who lets go has already put hope down. I walked into a cafe. On one of the tables, there was a half-finished cup of coffee. A thin film had formed on the surface of the coffee. I didn't know how long it had been sitting there. Days, weeks, months. Time didn't mean much to me yet. There was only before and now. And before was slowly getting blurrier. I touched the cup. It was cold. Of course it was cold. But I had to touch it, because when I touched something, I could believe it was real. This was a new habit. Or maybe I had always had it, and I was only now remembering. Behind the counter of the cafe, I found a notebook, the kind where orders are written down, with a coffee stain on the cover. I opened it to the last page. The last entry said, "No customers came today. Ahmet Abi pulled down his shutters yesterday." The news isn't saying anything, but everyone seems to know something. My mother called, told me to come back to the village. Maybe I will. Maybe tomorrow. There was no date. I didn't know when tomorrow was. But the word tomorrow, it made me feel something strange. Because whoever wrote that note, they believed in tomorrow. And tomorrow had come. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe that person had gone back to their village. And now they were there, sitting at a table, keeping another notebook. Or maybe they hadn't gone. Maybe right after writing that note, they had pulled down the shutters and never opened them again. I closed the notebook. I put it back. I didn't want to take it. Some things should stay where they are. That was a rule. The first rule I made for myself that morning. I walked out of the cafe. The sun had risen higher. The city was still silent. But I was beginning to notice that silence has different tones. The silence in front of a shop was different from the silence in the middle of a street. The wind slipping in through one window and out through another was like a breath. The city was breathing, but it was asleep. Or it was awake, and I was its dream. In those first days, it was very hard to tell the two apart. I walked toward Galata Tower. What? I don't know. Maybe I wanted to look down from high above. Maybe I wanted to see the city as a whole, to truly believe how empty it was. The human mind is very stubborn. It doesn't even believe what the eyes see. It always wants more proof. The door of the tower was open. The ticket booth inside was empty. I walked through the turnstiles. The stairs were narrow, winding. The sound of my footsteps echoed off the stone walls. And that echo, for the first time that day, was the only sound keeping me company. The echo of my own footsteps. An echo is like a human voice, but an echo that comes from your own voice is the purest form of loneliness, because the thing that answers you is still you. When I reached the top of the tower, my breath stopped. Not from the climb, from what I saw. Istanbul was spread out before me. Its 7 hills, its strait, its 2 continents, all that weight, all those thousands of years. And there was no one, no traffic, no ferries, no seagulls. Yes, no seagulls. I noticed it in that moment. And Istanbul without seagulls was like a body whose heart had stopped. And yet, it was beautiful. Maybe, for the very first time, it was this beautiful, because nothing was disturbing it. No billboards, no construction cranes, no car horns, no roar of the crowds, just the city, alone with itself, alone with its own old age. There, on top of the tower, I took the watch out of my pocket. I opened the cover. The hour hand was still at 11, the minute hand still at 4, but the ticking was still going. I was sure of it now. The watch had stopped, but something inside it was still moving. Not the inner mechanism of a watch, something else. Maybe time itself. Maybe time had stopped in this world. But in my pocket, it was still alive, like a small fugitive. Whose watch was this? Had I bought it? Had someone given it to me? I looked to see if there was any writing inside the cover. There was, engraved very faintly, almost worn away. I will come back to you. M. Who was M? Who was I to be someone another person would promise to return to? And had M come back? Or were they still on the way? Or was there no way left at all? I closed the watch. I put it back. I came down from the tower. I stayed in Istanbul one more day, then 2, then 3. I slept in one house, then in another, always in other people's beds. At first, this bothered me. Then I realized There was no such thing as other people anymore. All the beds, all the houses, all the cities, they didn't belong to anyone now. And that made them belong to everyone, including me. At the end of the third day, I packed a bag. What I put inside: 3 bottles of water, a few cans of food, a knife, a blanket, a lighter, a box of matches in case the lighter ran out, and an empty notebook that I had found. I didn't forget a pen. I took 2, in case one broke. Why a notebook? Because that day, at the top of Galata, I had understood something. If no one was left, then someone had to write down what they saw. If the world was gone, there needed to be a witness, someone to tell of its leaving. Maybe no one would read it, but writing is not always done to be read. Sometimes writing is just for not forgetting, and sometimes it isn't even for remembering. It is for simply existing. I pulled the bag onto my back. I looked at the Bosphorus one last time. The water was silent. The sky was silent. The city was silent. But I started walking. Walking in this new world was the most honest thing a person could do, because walking meant moving forward. And moving forward meant that one day you might arrive somewhere else. Maybe somewhere else there was someone else. Maybe there wasn't. But the road kept the question alive. And keeping a question alive was the only hope I could afford to carry in this world. I left Istanbul, heading west. The plains of Thrace were opening up before me. Behind me, the silence of the 7 hills was staying behind. And in my pocket, the ticking of a stopped watch was keeping me company. I asked myself, as I walked, who used to live here? And why was everything abandoned so suddenly? I had no answer. Maybe I was walking to find the answer. Or maybe walking itself was the answer. I don't know exactly when I crossed the border. I saw a customs gate. There were 2 flags above it. One was Turkey's, the other, Bulgaria's, both of them waving in the same wind. There was no one. The barrier was raised, as if even the last car to pass through had been too tired to lower it, or had understood that lowering it no longer meant anything. I walked, and I crossed. That was all. Crossing from one country to another used to be a ceremony. Passport, stamp, question, waiting, a smile, welcome. Now it was just a step. My right foot was in Turkey, my left foot in Bulgaria. Then both of my feet were in Bulgaria. Nothing changed. The sky was the same. The wind was the same. And I, for better or worse, kept being myself. After the border, the road ran straight for a long time. On both sides, there were fields. First wheat, then sunflowers. The sunflower fields made me stop, because I didn't know what season it was. But the sunflowers were still there. All of them. Millions. And all of them were bowed. Their heads turned downward. They were no longer following the sun. As if they were waiting. As if something had happened, and they had understood it too, and bowed their heads. I stopped in the middle of a sunflower field. I touched one of them. It was dry, but it was still standing. It had not dropped its seeds. I found this strange. A sunflower either drops its seeds, or it rots. There is no in between. But this field, as if time had never touched it, was frozen somewhere between life and death. Maybe I just wanted to believe they were alive. The human mind, when it is alone, gives everything the role of a companion. It gives a tree a name. It speaks to a stone. It imagines that a sunflower field is greeting it. This is not madness. It is just a way of surviving. Because loneliness only kills you when you realize you are alone. Making up a companion is a kind of looking away technique. I kept going. When I reached the first large village, the sun was about to set. At the entrance of the village, there was a sign, Srem. I could read it. I don't know how I knew the Cyrillic alphabet. Maybe I had learned it once. Maybe I was learning it in that moment. In this world, asking where your knowledge came from was a wasted effort. What I knew was only what I carried. Nothing more. The village was small. 15, maybe 20 houses, all made of stone. Low roofs, narrow windows. A church bell tower stood in the middle of the village, slightly tilted, as if, over the years, it had slowly leaned to one side, but had decided stubbornly not to fall. Some buildings are like that. They forget how to fall. I walked into the first house. The door was open. The inside was dim. There was a table. On the table, 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 glasses, There was nothing on the plates. Either nothing had ever been placed on them, or whatever was there had turned to dust long ago. On one of the glasses, there was a dry stain. Red. Could have been wine. It could have been blood. In that world, the difference between the two sometimes disappeared. But it was probably wine. Because this village had not seen war. This village had only been let go. I could feel it. War is a noise. Being let go is a silence. In silence, I knew very well by now. 3 people. 1 table. I imagined them. Maybe a husband and wife and their child. Maybe an old woman, her son, and her daughter-in-law. Maybe 3 siblings. They had sat down for dinner. The table had been set. Then something had happened. Either they had stood up and left, or they had never been able to stand up at all. But if it had been the second, there would be bones here. There were no bones. Only 3 plates. And that was more painful than bones. Because bones tell you an ending. An empty plate only leaves behind a question. I passed by the table. I didn't touch it. At the back of the house, there was a small kitchen, a stove, an oven, jars on a shelf. There were still things inside the jars. Pickles, jam, dried tomatoes. I opened one, jam. I smelled it. It still had a scent. Honey, apricot. I dipped a finger in. I tasted it. It was still sweet. The last thing that had come from a human hand was a jar of jam. The woman who made it, or the man or whoever it was, had picked the fruit, put the pot over the fire, boiled it, added sugar, poured it into jars, sealed the lids tight. And they had done all of this without knowing that the world was going to leave. Or knowing. Or somewhere between knowing and not knowing, with the stubbornness that comes with being human, they had done it anyway. Because a jar of jam is meant to be eaten tomorrow. And tomorrow, no matter what will come. Without that belief, no one makes jam. I took the jam. This was my first violation. My first act of disloyalty to the rule I had made in Istanbul, that some things should stay where they are. But that jar had told me something. It wanted to be eaten. Because what was inside it had been made with love. And things made with love want to be consumed with love. They don't want to go to waste. I put the jar in my bag. That night, I slept in the village church. The door was open. I went inside. The church was small. Maybe it held 20 people. On the ceiling, there was an icon. The Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. The colors had faded, but the faces were still visible. Mary's eyes were looking down at the baby, and the baby's eyes were looking up, not at Mary, at the viewer, directly. He was seeing me. That was how it felt, and I did not deny the feeling. I laid my blanket on one of the pews. I lay down. I took the watch out of my pocket. I held it to my ear. The ticking was still there. 11 and 4. Always the same. But the ticking was alive. I said out loud. For the first time, I was saying something out loud. Since Istanbul. My voice felt strange, as if it belonged to someone else. It echoed inside the church. Who were you? Of course there was no answer. But sometimes, a question itself is as satisfying as an answer. Because a question means that something is still being wondered about. And wondering is another word for living. I slept, and I saw a woman in my dream. I couldn't quite see her face, but her hands were very clear. She was holding something out to me. A book. The cover of the book was pure white. I opened it. Every page inside was blank. The woman smiled and said, "Write." I asked, "Write what?" The woman said, "What you see." I said, "I don't see anything." The woman said, "Then write that." When I woke up, it was morning. Thin light was coming through the narrow window of the church. And I, with the first reflex of someone waking from a dream, took the notebook out of my bag. I picked up the pen. I opened to the first page. And I wrote. My first sentence was this: "There is no one here." But something was. And it left. And from where it went, it left behind a scent. I am following that scent. When I wrote it, something changed inside me. Very small. But it changed. A weight lifted. And another weight, a stranger one, a quieter one, took its place. The weight of being a witness. As I was leaving the village, as I passed between the houses, I looked through one last window. This window belonged to a child's room. There were drawings on the wall. Children's drawings. Made with dry paint. A house. A tree. A sun. A family. Everything in its place. In one of the drawings, there were 3 people. A mother. A father. A child. Underneath them, in a shaky handwriting, in Cyrillic letters, something was written. I couldn't read it, but I understood it. Some writings can be understood without being read. That writing said, us. Just that. Us. The shortest sentence in the world, and the most painful sentence ever written in this world. I pulled back from the window. I walked. When I reached the last house at the edge of the village, I did not look back. Looking back was a rule I had never liked. A person who looks back does not move forward. And in this world, the one who moves forward keeps living. Sunflower fields continued on both sides of the road. I walked for hours. At some point, the sunflowers thinned out. In their place came black earth, brush, solitary trees. The smell of the ground changed. The smell of inland Bulgaria was not salty, not a forest smell either. It was a smell of dust and grass. As if this land had seen much, buried much, and had now decided to forget. Around noon, I saw a town in the distance, on top of a high hill, surrounded by the ruins of old walls. An ancient place, maybe Roman, maybe Thracian, maybe both. The stones were old, and when I looked at them, something moved inside me. Because those stones were there before the people left, and they would still be there after I was gone. We were only guests. In the eyes of those stones, all of humanity had been a visit shorter than a lunch break. I started climbing the hill. The path was narrow and stony. My legs were tired. But tiredness in this new world was a kind of companionship. My body was reminding me, with every step, that it still belonged to me. And that was a blessing. Halfway up the hill, I stopped. I looked back. This time, I looked, because I had decided in that moment to bend my rule. Otherwise, some beauty would have been lost. The sunflower fields stretched on forever. The sun, a pale yellow, was falling on them. And all those millions of heads, still bowed, in a kind of prayer posture, were waiting. I still didn't know what they were waiting for. But maybe they too were witnesses, like me. Maybe they too were bowing their heads and waiting to bear witness to the leaving of this world. As one final duty, with no one else left, I took the watch out of my pocket. I opened the cover. I will come back to you. So will I said slowly, not knowing who I was saying it to. The sunflowers? Myself? Maybe all three. So will I come back. But come back to where? I did not yet know. I kept climbing. The town was waiting for me. And the town, probably, would also have a story to tell me. Every abandoned place whispers its own story. You only have to know how to stop and listen. And in those days, I was just beginning to learn this. How to listen. How to really listen. How to listen to emptiness. Because emptiness sometimes was the thing that spoke the most. Before we continue, I want to remind you of something. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so that I can keep making more videos like this. Thank you. After I left the town behind, the days began to blur together. Morning, noon, evening. These things no longer mattered. The sun rose. I walked. The sun set. I found a place, and I slept. There was no such thing as a calendar. The days of the week, like a song you learn as a child, were slowly being erased from my mind. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Once upon a time, these words had meaning. Now they were only sounds, only syllables. In the west of Bulgaria, I crossed a river. I didn't know its name. There was an old stone bridge over it. The middle had collapsed, but both sides were still standing. I walked carefully. As I crossed the middle of the bridge, I looked down. The water was flowing slowly, and in the water, there was something. A rowboat. A small wooden rowboat. Its edge had struck the bank, half sunk. Inside it, a fishing rod, a bucket, and a hat, a straw hat, its brim worn, a hat that had once shielded someone from the sun, worn for years, eaten by sweat and salt. I didn't think about who the boat belonged to, because I had given up that habit. Imagining a story behind every abandoned object was wearing me down over time. Some things just were. The boat was, the hat was, I was, and the three of us, right then, on top of that river, were part of a meeting. That was enough. I crossed the bridge. Sometime later, I realized I had entered Serbia, from a sign by the side of the road. Cyrillic letters on a white background. The sign was tilted. Half of its post was broken. And on top of it, an owl was standing. For the first time, I was seeing a living creature. That thought shook me. I stopped where I was. I didn't breathe. The owl looked at me. It turned its head slowly, with that strange mechanical turning that owls have, and examined me. It had yellow eyes, and in those yellow eyes, there was curiosity. No fear, no hostility, just curiosity. As if it too, like me, had not encountered another living thing in this world. And seeing me had reminded it of something. How long did we look at each other? A second? A minute? A year? I don't know. Then the owl opened its wings and flew away, silently. Owls fly silently. I knew that, to surprise their prey. But that owl was not running from anyone. It was just leaving. And its leaving was like a message to me. You are not alone, but you are almost alone. And the difference between the two is the rest of your life. After the owl was gone, I stood there a little longer. Then I kept walking. But something had changed inside me. For the first time, that day, I thought, maybe others besides me exist too. They might not be human, but there were things that existed. And this, strangely, did not give me hope. It gave me a feeling of companionship. In all of this empty world, there was at least one owl. It was lonely too, but it was lonely and it was alive. My path led me toward the mountains. In the interior of Serbia, the terrain changes. Plains end, hills begin, hills turn into mountains, and in the mountains, the air changes. For the first time that day, I started to feel cold. I took the blanket out of my bag, wrapped it over my shoulders. My breath became visible, small white clouds rising and vanishing in the air. I watched my breath for a while. Seeing that my body was still warm, that there was still a fire inside me, was a strange kind of comfort. In the afternoon, the fog began to descend. First it climbed up from the valley below. Then it wrapped around the road I was on. Then everything. I couldn't see 10 meters ahead of me, but I kept walking. There was no point in stopping. No matter where I positioned myself, the fog found me. Walking through fog is like walking through a dream. You feel your feet, but it's as if the ground isn't there. Your eyes are open, but there is nothing to look at. And time, inside fog, flows differently. Slower, or faster. It becomes unmeasurable. As I moved through the fog, in the distance, I saw the silhouette of something. First I thought it was a tree, then a rock. Then as I got closer, I understood. A building, a tall stone building, and a cross. It was a monastery. By the time I reached its door, the sun had set. The fog was still thick, but the monastery itself stood in the fog like an island. Its walls were thick, its door heavy. On the door, an iron knocker, in the shape of a lion's head. I reached out to the knocker. I didn't want to knock. Knocking had no meaning since no one would answer. But I placed my hand on the iron. It was cold, cold for years, as if no one had ever touched this iron with a warm hand. The door opened when I pushed it. It wasn't locked, or its lock had broken long ago. I stepped inside. The interior of the monastery opened onto a courtyard. In the middle of the courtyard, a well, stone, round, with an iron wheel on top. Next to the well, between the stones, a stubborn little clump of grass had grown. I saw something in that grass. Proof that something could still grow, even after the world had ended. That something, on its own, was still continuing its own story. I bent down. I touched it. It was alive beneath my fingers. Soft, living. From the courtyard, I passed into a corridor. On the walls of the corridor, there were frescoes. Saints, angels, scenes. Their colors had faded, but the faces were still there. One saint held a book in his hand. Another saint held a sword. Another had raised his hands to the sky and was looking up. All of them had the same expression on their faces. A kind of patience, a kind of waiting. As if for centuries in this corridor, they had been waiting for someone to pass by. For someone to stop and look at them. And I passed by, and I stopped, and I looked. And it felt, this may sound very strange, but I felt it that day, it felt as if the frescoes were relieved. Being seen is sometimes a confirmation of being. The frescoes had existed for centuries, but maybe in recent years, no one had looked at them. I looked. That was enough. I hope. At the end of the corridor, there was a church, the main place of worship. It was small. It might have held 30 people. The ceiling was domed, and in the center of the dome, there was an image of Christ, the Pantocrator, the one who rules over all things. His face was serious, but not angry. just serious. And his eyes found me the moment I walked in and did not let go. I walked between the pews, toward the altar. On the altar, there were candles. Not burning, of course. A few books. And strangely, a sheet of paper. Folded. Something was written on it. But the writing was not Cyrillic. It was Latin letters. English. That surprised me. I picked up the paper. I unfolded it. I read. Whoever comes here, the fact that you are reading these words means that you can still read. And if you can read, you are still alive. I stayed here for 4 months. I was alone. No one came. The food ran out, and I am leaving. I am going west. Maybe there is a sea. Maybe there are ships. I don't know. But I have to go. Because waiting after a while starts to feel like dying. If you find me, no, you won't find me. But if you follow my trail, I hope the place you arrive at is better than the place I went to. My name is Elena. And thank you for reading this. I don't know why I'm thanking you, but I am. Maybe to be read is to not die. Elena. I held the paper in my hand for a long time. Then I read it again. And then again. Because there was someone called Elena before me in this monastery. And she had left, going west, the same direction I was going. There was someone else. Someone else. Those words in that moment were like poetry to me. Someone else. A person. An Elena. Someone with a name. Someone who could make decisions. Someone who could leave a note. Someone who could say thank you. I folded the paper again. But this time, I put it in my pocket. This was my second violation. Against the rule I had made in Istanbul. But some rules exist to be broken. Elena's note was not mine. But in a way, it was for me. Because she had left it for someone. And right now, that someone was me. And I was accepting it. That night, I slept in the monastery. In one of the small cells where the monks had once stayed. Inside, only a wooden cot. A table. A chair. A cross on the wall. From the window, I could see the fog. It was still there. Maybe it would never end. I laid out my blanket. I lay down. I had 2 pieces of paper in my pocket now. The stopwatch. And Elena's note. I took them both out. Placed them beside me. I listened to the ticking of the watch. I read Elena's words again. In the darkness. Almost by heart. Waiting after a while starts to feel like dying. That sentence made me think deeply. Because it was true. And because it had been said by a stranger before me. And knowing that someone before me had thought the same thing gave me a kind of kinship. Not a kinship of blood. A kinship of thought. The brotherhood of those who have asked the same questions in the same darkness. Before falling asleep, I took out my notebook. I picked up the pen. I opened to the second page. I wrote. There was someone named Elena. She didn't know me, but she wrote to me. And now I am writing to her. In a language she doesn't know. And at a time she doesn't know. Maybe this is the purest form of communication that can exist between people. 2 strangers in an empty room calling out to each other. Elena, waiting really does feel like dying. But walking, I must warn you, walking is also a kind of death. Just slower. And maybe more honest. When I finished writing, I felt relieved. I closed the notebook. I slept. In my dream, I saw Elena. I imagined her face because in real life I had never seen it. A woman with long hair. Dark eyes. She was sitting under a tree, holding a pen, writing. I walked toward her. I wanted to ask what she was writing, but I didn't speak, because I didn't want to disturb her. You should never disturb someone who is writing, especially in this world, because writing was a way of surviving. Maybe the only way. When I woke from the dream, it was morning. The fog had cleared. From the window of the monastery, I saw the outside for the first time. Mountains. Green. Dark green. Mountains stacked on top of each other, stretching to infinity. And between them, the thin line of a river. The sky was clear. For the first time in days, a clear sky. I packed my bag. Before leaving the monastery, I went down to the courtyard one more time. I went to the well. That small, stubborn clump of grass was still there. I bent down and spoke to it, out loud. You're staying here, I said. I'm going. But you're staying here. One day, someone else might come. Show yourself to them. Tell them that not everything is over. That something that can still grow is still here. Okay. The grass did not answer, of course. But a light wind blew, and its leaves trembled. I accepted that as an okay. In this world, every small movement had to carry a meaning. Otherwise, meaning would disappear entirely. I walked out of the monastery. I closed the door behind me. I couldn't lock it, but I closed it, with respect, as if leaving a home, and I kept walking. Elena's path was now my path. She had gone west. I would go west too. I knew I would never find her. But finding her, maybe, wasn't the point. Following her trail was enough. Because as long as a trail is being followed, the person who left it is, in a way, still walking. Coming down from the mountains took days. The path sometimes disappeared. As I moved through the forest, I couldn't tell whether the trail I was walking was really a trail or just a line I was imagining. But I felt as if the trees were guiding me. West. Always west. The moss on the trunks of the trees told me where north was. How did I know this? I don't know. Maybe I had been a camper once. Maybe I had been through some kind of military training. Maybe I had just read it in a book. I didn't know who I was, but I had stopped asking where my knowledge came from. Knowledge came and went, like an unfaithful friend. Somewhere in the forest, I came across a ruined cabin. Tree branches had fallen on it. Half of it was buried in the earth. Inside there was a stove, rusted, and on a shelf, a small radio, old style, with dials. I picked it up. I shook it. Something fell out. A battery, still not dried out. Miraculously, still not dried out. I put the battery back in. I turned the dial. A crackle. Static. Only static. But I thought, maybe there's someone on a frequency. Maybe someone somewhere is still broadcasting. I turned the dial slowly, from one end to the other. Always static. Always the same sound. It was like the sound the wind makes passing through a river. But inside that sound, there was no life. Just the whisper of space itself. And then, for a moment, I thought I heard something. A piece of music. Very brief. A piano note. Maybe two. Then it was gone. I turned the dial back. Nothing. Forward, back. Nothing. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe my own mind was whispering something to me. I turned off the radio. I put it back on the shelf. But that piano note, for the rest of that day and the days after, kept echoing in my head. 2 notes. Only 2. No beginning. No end. But knowing them meant knowing something. And knowing something, in this world, meant everything. I left the cabin. It took 2 more days to get out of the forest. Then one morning, suddenly, the trees thinned out. The ground sloped downward. And below me, far below, I saw blue. The sea. The Adriatic. I fell to my knees. Not on purpose. My legs just couldn't carry the weight of what I was seeing. I collapsed. And for a while, I just looked. The sea, for me, or for whoever me, must have been something special. Because seeing it, something rose up inside me. Not a memory, a feeling, a longing. But a longing for what? I didn't know. And not knowing made the longing even purer. The sea was blue. But the word blue was not enough. Turquoise, navy, ivory white, the color of the stones on the shore blending into the water. The sun was breaking into 1,000 pieces on the surface of the water. And each piece, like a small mirror, was whispering something to the sky. I descended to the shore. It took hours. The road was steep, stony. But I wasn't in a hurry. The sea wasn't going anywhere. And neither was I. I was just getting closer. When I reached the shore, the sun was close to noon. I took off my shoes, my socks. My feet pressed against the white stones. They were warm. They had soaked up the heat of the sun, and were giving it back to me. I took a few steps, reached the edge of the water. A wave came, licked my feet. It was cold, but it was a pleasant cold, a living cold. The water still smelled of salt, of seaweed. No smell of fish. Maybe there were no fish anymore. But there was salt. And salt is the oldest smell of a kind of life. I sat down on the stones. I looked far out. There was nothing on the horizon. No ship. No island. No airplane trail in the sky. Only blue. And another blue touching the blue. The line between them, the horizon, was completely undisturbed. A horizon untouched by human hands. Maybe for the first time in centuries. This empty. Maybe this was the beauty, this emptiness, this cleanness, this infinity, undisturbed by anything. I sat for a long time. After a while, I noticed something. Among the sand, it wasn't really sand, it was white pebbles, but still, something was shining. I reached out, picked it up. Blast. Sea glass. Rolled for years inside the water. its sharp edges worn down, a piece of matte green. It had once been part of a bottle, maybe a wine bottle, maybe a medicine bottle. Now it was just a stone, but a beautiful stone. I put it in my pocket. Then I saw something else. A little farther ahead, among the stones, something. I walked onto the beach. I bent down. It was a letter. Inside a bottle. Saying this, even now, feels strange to me. Because this is something you read about in old books. A cliché. A message in a bottle. But there, that day in front of me, it was real. The bottle glass was green. The stopper was dried cork. I turned it upside down. Inside, a folded piece of paper. It was hard to open the bottle. The cork was very old. It broke into pieces. I pulled the paper out. I unfolded it. The writing was in Italian. I recognized it from a few words. Amore mare tempo. Well, time. 3 words. I did not know Italian. But I didn't even need to wonder whether a sentence was made up of these 3 words. Whatever those words were telling, the entire letter was about that. And at the bottom, a name. Giovanni. Giovanni. Someone from Italy. Maybe from the other side of the sea. He had thrown this bottle into the sea. And the current had brought it here to the coast of Croatia. Maybe years ago. Maybe months ago. Maybe last week. There was no way to know. Now I was going to Italy too. It wasn't a plan. My path was taking me there. But now I had a purpose. Or something like one. Because Giovanni existed. Or had existed. And if I was lucky, if that word still meant anything, I would go to where he had gone. Like Elena. Another trail. Another echo. I folded the letter. Not back into the bottle. Into my pocket. Next to Elena's note. Deliberately now. A kind of collection was forming. But this was not a collection. This was an archive. The silent archive of people who had left. And I was their carrier. That night I slept on the beach. At the foot of a rock. In a place sheltered from the wind. The stars were magnificent. Without the lights of a city, without any pollution in the air, the sky had fully opened up. For the first time I saw the Milky Way this clearly. Or, for the first time I could remember. Like a river of silver, it was flowing across the sky. And every star was like a message. Light cast thousands of years ago, was now reaching me. In a way, I was also a message in a bottle. A message from beyond time. And maybe, far in the future, someone would see the light I had cast. And they would read it. Maybe no one would ever see it. But I would keep casting light. Because the stars had no other choice, only to burn. And maybe I too had no other choice, only to walk. In the morning, I looked at the sea one more time. Then I stood up. I shouldered my bag. I started walking along the coast. North. Always north. Because Italy was there. Venice. Ravenna. Maybe Rome. Big names. Big ghosts. As I walked, the white pebbles crunched beneath my feet. Every step was on top of these small stones. Stones that had once been part of a cliff. That had fallen to the shore over millions of years. That the sea had worn down, made round. And I guessed near the end of these stones' journey, was passing over them. One day these stones would also turn to dust. But for me right now, they existed. And I, for them, maybe, existed too. The Adriatic accompanied me along the way. Sometimes the path moved away from the coast. Sometimes it returned. Sometimes the sea couldn't be seen at all, only its smell came through. Then at a bend, suddenly, it would appear again. And every time I would stop again. Because the sea is not something a person can get used to. Every glance is new. And even if a person does get used to it, what they get used to is their own gaze, not the sea itself. The sea always remains foreign, always larger, always older. With this thought, I continued. Days passed. The sun deepened my tan. Salt tightened the skin of my body. One day I looked at myself in a mirror, a reflection in the window of a house. And I saw a face I didn't recognize. I knew it was mine. But at the same time it was a stranger. The beard had grown long. The hair was tangled. The eyes seemed deeper. As if a room inside me had grown during this journey. And my eyes were its window. I looked at my reflection for a long time. Then I said quietly, "Hello." The reflection of course didn't answer. But its lips moved like mine. It said the same, "Hello." And that was enough. It wasn't a conversation. But it was a familiar greeting. With myself. And greeting yourself, in this world, when there is no one else, was a necessity. I didn't know when I had crossed the border. Croatia had ended, Slovenia had begun, Slovenia had ended, Italy had begun. But all of this was on maps. On the land, in the soil, in the trees, these borders did not exist. There was only the road I was walking. And one day, the road led me down from a hill. And from the top of that hill, in the distance, I saw something extending out into the sea. A city. But it wasn't really a city. It was something built on top of the water. Something that had become part of the water. Something that had sunk into the water. There were towers. There were domes. And everything in the morning mist seemed to be floating. A floating city. Venice. Venice could not be entered on foot, in the old days. In the old days you came by train, by ferry, maybe by water taxi. Now, no one was coming. And I, for the first time, was entering this city on my feet. As a traveler. On foot. The long bridge was still there. Ponte della Libertà. The Bridge of Freedom. I read the name from a sign. The bridge was kilometers long. I walked on top of it. Below me, on both sides, the lagoon stretched out. Shallow waters. Thin grass. One or two birds. Nothing else. The bridge ended. My feet touched Venice. And Venice, on that first step, took me in. Because Venice, from the outside, is a kind of dream. But when you enter it, it is another kind of dream. Deeper. More tangled. And now, without people, that dream had turned into an endless dream. I walked through the narrow streets. The streets were so narrow, two people could barely fit side by side. The stones on the ground were uneven. And every 2 steps, a bridge. A canal. There were gondolas along the edges of the canals. Half sunk. Half on the surface. Black. Graceful. Like dead birds. A water bird had made a nest inside one of them. That day when I saw that nest, I remember I smiled. It had been a long time since I had smiled. And smiling felt like a forgotten muscle movement. Strange, but sweet. I reached St. Mark's Square. I had been walking all morning. The square was a huge emptiness. A giant open space in the heart of Venice. On all sides, arched buildings. In the middle, that famous church. The basilica. And the bell tower, the campanile, rising into the sky. But the square was covered in water. Had the tide come in? Had there been a flood? I didn't know. But there was a hand's depth of water over the stones. Everywhere. And this water, like a mirror, was reflecting everything. The basilica. The campanile. The sky. The clouds. And as I entered from the edge of the square, I saw my own reflection in the water. Upside down. It was as if there were 2 Venices. One real. One sleeping in the water. And I was walking on the border between them. The water was shallow. It didn't even reach my ankles. But still, every step created a ripple. And every ripple made the reflected city tremble slightly. As if Venice, even in its reflection, was whispering something in its sleep. And its lips were trembling. I stopped in the middle of the square. I looked around. There was no one, of course. But in that moment, the absence of anyone felt like the most right thing. Because Venice was a city meant to be seen alone. Maybe it had always been that way. Maybe people had been disturbing it. And now, with no one to disturb her, Venice had returned to her deep sleep. Her 1,000-year sleep. The door of the basilica was half open. I went inside. The inside was dim. And damp. The ceiling was covered in gold. Mosaics. Thousands of tiny pieces of gold. Each one reflecting light. Together forming a sky. The light coming through a single window was illuminating this golden sky. And with every step, from every angle, the mosaics shone differently. I sat down on a pew. For a long time. I just sat. Even looking was too much. Just being there was enough. The silence inside the basilica was different from the silence outside. Thicker. Fuller. As if this silence was the sum of all the prayers spoken over centuries. The prayers had gone, but their sense had remained. I took the notebook out of my pocket. I wrote, I am in Venice, or Venice is in me. I cannot tell. This city sleeps in the water, and I am walking through its dream. There is gold inside the basilica, but gold is nothing. Silence is everything. If one day I have to describe this world to someone, I will say this. When the people left, the most beautiful things they had made became even more beautiful, because no one was disturbing them anymore. The church, the museum, the statue, all of them became free, as if they had been held captive for centuries, under the gaze of people. And now they were only with themselves, and they are more beautiful. It is a painful beauty, but beauty is beauty. I closed the notebook. I stood up. As I was leaving the basilica, next to the door, I saw a candle, half burned, extinguished. Someone had lit it, years ago, or months ago, or maybe yesterday because I couldn't know. Next to it, a box of matches. What? Unusable. But the fact that the candle had been lit meant something. Someone had prayed, and after praying, they had gone. That candle that day for me was the holiest thing in Venice, holier than the golden mosaics, because the golden mosaics had been made centuries ago and had been waiting. But that candle, recently, had carried the fear, the hope, the gratitude of a human being. And the candle had gone out. But the prayer, maybe, was still in the air, inside the air, between the molecules, in a kind of waiting. I left the basilica. The square was still covered in water. There were pigeons. Pigeons. Pigeons had stayed in Venice. They weren't in Istanbul, but they were here. That made me feel good. Maybe the pigeons of Istanbul had migrated here. Maybe the pigeons of every city had migrated to another city. And now in the world, pigeons were only gathering in a few places. Maybe Venice was one of them. Maybe Venice was where birds sought refuge. A few pigeons were standing in the middle of the square, in the water. They looked as if they were walking on water. I approached them. They did not fly away. One looked at me. Another looked the other way. They saw me, but they were not afraid, because they had forgotten how to be afraid, because there was no one left to be afraid of. And I was no longer someone who could cause fear. They knew that too. I came even closer. I bent down. One of them, the closest, did not take a single step back. I reached out. My fingers touched its feathers. Soft, warm. A small heart inside its chest was beating very fast, but not from panic, just because it was the heart of a bird. Beating fast was the nature of a bird's heart. "Hello," I said to it. The bird, of course, said nothing, but it bowed its head. Was it a greeting, or just a movement? I couldn't tell, but I accepted it as a greeting. I stayed in Venice for 3 days. Every day I walked into a different street, a different church, a different bridge. One day, I stopped on the Rialto Bridge. In the windows of the small shops on top of the bridge, there were still things. Masks. Carnival masks. The famous masks of Venice. White, gold, red. One of them had the face of a bird. A plague doctor's mask, with a long beak. In the Middle Ages, people wore them to protect themselves from the plague. Flowers and spices would be placed inside the beak, to shield them from the smell of the sick. Now, that mask from behind the glass was looking at me, and I at it. We both knew the same thing. Something had happened. The mask didn't know what. I didn't either. But something had happened. I entered a shop, a small bookstore. On the shelves, Italian books. I didn't know Italian, but some names were familiar. Dante, Calvino, Go. I touched the books. One of them, by Calvino, fell to the floor. I bent down. I picked it up. A sentence on the open page caught my eye. Italian, but I could still make out something. One word, città, city, and another word, invisibili, invisible, invisible cities. Maybe that was the title of the book. I was in the invisible cities. Was Venice right now really invisible? Or was it only invisible because no one was looking at it? Does a city with no one to see it still exist? Or is it a thought experiment, like the tree in the forest? If it falls and no one hears it, does it make a sound? Venice had not fallen, but there was no one to hear it. And maybe that was stranger than falling. I put the book back. I went outside. I decided that day to leave Venice. If I stayed too long, I would get stuck in these waters, in this sleep, and falling asleep. For now, I was refusing. There was still more road, more trails to follow. On the way out of Venice, at the start of the bridge, I looked at the water one last time. The lagoon was still, like a mirror. And in the mirror, for a moment, I saw my own face, twice. Once in the water, once deeper in the water as another reflection. 2 of my faces, both were mine, and both were strangers. I took the watch out of my pocket. I opened the cover. I held it to my ear. The ticking was still there. But this time I was sure of it. The ticking had changed slightly. Slower, or faster, or exactly the same, but I was different. I closed the watch. I put it back in my pocket. I crossed the bridge. Venice stayed behind me. A city drowning in water, sleeping, its dream continuing. One day, a day I would not know, the water would take it completely. And Venice, like its first imagining, like its first night, like a fishing village sinking into a marsh, would disappear entirely. But right now, in that moment, it was still there. And I had seen it. That was something. That was maybe a great deal. My path now turned south. The Italian peninsula was long, and I would follow its spine. The Apennines, maybe to Rome, maybe further south. Giovanni's letter was still in my pocket, and I was still looking for him, even knowing I would not find him. Because looking sometimes was more important than finding. Looking meant that a direction existed, and having a direction in this world was everything. Going south from Venice felt like passing from one dream into another. The first few days, I walked across flat plains. I crossed the Po River, on top of the bridge, listening to the sound of the water. The water was still flowing. That comforted me, because as long as waters kept flowing, a kind of heart of the world was still beating, like a body whose arteries had clogged, whose brain had gone silent, but whose heart was still beating. After the plains, the hills began, and with the hills, something else. Olive trees. When I saw the first olive grove, I stopped, because olive trees are not like any other tree. Their trunks are twisted, curled, turned in upon themselves, as if for centuries they had been suffering the same pain and had carved that pain into their bodies. Their leaves are silver green, one side dark, the other side light. When the wind blows, an olive grove ripples, but not like the sea, differently, more quietly, more cold. I sat down beneath one of the olive trees. I leaned my back against its trunk. The trunk was warm. It had pulled the sun's heat into itself and was giving it back to me. For a while I just sat there, and then I noticed the tree was listening to me. This may sound very strange, but on that day, I was certain of it. Olive trees are very old. Some of them are 1,000 years old, 2,000 years old. The roots of this tree might have been planted during the time of the Roman Empire. Caesar's soldiers might have passed beneath this tree. A farmer might have slept in its shade. A love might have been born beneath it. A war might have been won or lost around it. And now, at the end of all those centuries, I was there. The last visitor, maybe, or the second to last. There was no way to know. "You have seen much," I said to the tree, "and now there is nothing. What does that feel like?" The tree, of course, did not answer, but a wind rose, a small, gentle wind, and its leaves rustled. The rustling was like a word. Maybe it was saying, "I got used to it." Maybe it was saying, "It doesn't matter." Maybe it was just the rustling of leaves, and it meant nothing, and I had invented a meaning. But inventing meaning, as I had told myself many times, was a way of surviving in this new world. I walked across the hills of Tuscany for days. The road wound, from one hill to another, and on top of each hill, there was a town. Soft terracotta-colored houses, a bell tower, walls of yellow stone. From a distance, the towns looked like paintings. As you got closer, they turned into reality. And in reality, reality was always the same. Empty. Open doors. Faded geraniums in front of the windows. Cats. Yes, sometimes there were cats. Especially in Tuscany. Maybe cats had survived everywhere. Maybe cats had never needed humans at all. They had only tolerated us. And now, free of us, they were building their own kingdoms. In one town, I couldn't read the name, the sign had fallen. I stopped in a small square. In the middle of the square, a fountain, with a stone lion figure on top. Water had once flowed from the mouth of that lion. Now it wasn't flowing. The basin of the fountain was dry. A few dry leaves at the bottom. I sat down on its edge. The door of the building across from me was open. I looked inside. It was a barber shop. A chair, a mirror, scissors, everything in its place. And on the chair in front of the mirror, an apron was hanging, white, with something like a dried blood stain on it. Maybe just an old stain. Maybe a drop that had touched it during a shave. A stain the barber had forgotten to wash later. I imagined who the barber might have been. An old man. Maybe Marcello. Maybe Giuseppe. He opened his shop every morning, waited for his customers, knew everyone's name, knew the names of everyone's sons, knew the names of everyone's grandsons. He talked football with them, weather, politics carefully. While he cut someone's hair, he looked in the mirror and said, "Like this." The customer said, "Like that." And both of them thought the same thing. Life is passing, but this chair is here. This mirror is here. These scissors are here. These things do not pass. They must not pass. But they did pass. Marcello, or Giuseppe, was gone. and an apron remained, with a dried stain. I walked into the barber shop. I sat down on the chair. I looked in the mirror, and I saw myself, long-haired, long-bearded, familiar but distant. I picked up the scissors. They were still sharp, well-kept, well-sharpened. And I, as a tribute to the soul of the barber, to the memory of this man I did not know, I cut my own hair. I cut it badly, uneven, crooked, but I cut it. I watched my hair falling to the floor. I left it there. Maybe one day someone would come here, see those strands, and say, "Someone stood here." That is a kind of message, like another word I had spoken. I walked out of the barber shop. The mirror had given me a new face, and the new face was lighter than the old one. I felt as if I had thrown the weight of my hair from my shoulders. There are burdens a person doesn't know about, but which their body still carries. Now, I had put one of them down. That evening, I slept in a vineyard, unkept, wild, but still alive. The vines had grown, climbed over, spread. There were grapes, small, probably sour, but real grapes. I broke off a bunch. I put one into my mouth. It was sour, but beneath the sourness, there was a kind of sweetness, the sweetness of centuries, the wine of Tuscan soil itself. I ate the whole bunch. I spit out the seeds. Maybe one day, one of those seeds would become another vine, and another traveler, a very long time from now, would eat a grape from it. The next day I continued on. I was getting closer to Florence. I could tell, the signs were already saying so. Firenze, 40 kilometers. Firenze, 25 kilometers. Firenze, 10 kilometers. The numbers were getting smaller, but something inside me was getting bigger. Because Florence, even though I had never seen it, was a legend. Art, the Renaissance, Michelangelo, Dante. How does a city become a legend? Because people spoke differently when they went there and came back. And now I was going there. But I had no one to come back to. No one to speak differently to. I arrived in Florence in the late afternoon. I looked at the city from above. From a hill. Piazzale Michelangelo. It was written on a sign. From that hill, Florence was visible from end to end. The Duomo, the great cathedral, Brunelleschi's dome, rose from the center of the city. Red roofs, yellow stone buildings, the gentle curve of the Arno River, and hills in the distance. The sun was setting. Florence had turned golden. I sat down on the hill, on a stone bench, and I looked. I just looked. 4 hours. The sun set. The city went dark. But even in its darkness, there was a kind of light inside it. The light of stones that had gathered the sun all day and were giving it back to the night. Florence was not dead. Florence was only tired. And now it was resting. I came down from the hill. At night, I entered the city. I walked through the streets. And at one point, right in front of the Duomo, I stopped. Because there, on the stones, was something. Colored dust. Pastel powder. Spilled somewhere. Or the remains of a drawing an artist had made there. Street artists used to work like this. For tourists, they would draw on the stones with chalk with colored powder. Then the rain would come and it would all be gone. The rain had not yet come. Or it had come lightly. The drawing was half erased. But it was still visible. It was a woman's face. Maybe a Madonna. Maybe just a woman. Her eyes were beautiful. Her lips slightly curved, smiling, grieving? Impossible to tell. A copy of the Mona Lisa? Perhaps. But on the street, with chalk, on the stones, alone. I crouched beside the drawing. I reached out. I touched a corner with my finger. The dust stuck to my finger. Red. I stood up. I did not wipe my finger. For a while, I carried that red on my finger. Then, on a wall, a white wall, I placed a small dot. Just a dot. A red dot on a white wall. Not a signature. Not a message. Just a dot. I was here. The smallest sentence. I stayed in Florence for 2 days. I went into the Uffizi. The museum doors were open. The paintings inside were still in place. No one had stolen them, because there was no one left to steal them. Botticelli's Primavera was waiting in one hall. I sat down across from it, for a long time. In the painting, there are 9 figures. Gods, nymphs, flowers, all of them inside a garden. All of them in a kind of movement. A dance, but slow, almost a stop dance. Their faces are calm. None of them are in a hurry. Maybe they, for 500 years inside that canvas, had known that one day the world would empty. And they had been ready. They had been born ready. I looked at the painting for a long time. Then I took out my notebook, and I wrote, "There are 9 figures in Botticelli's Primavera, and none of them are alone. They are touching each other or standing close to each other. If this were not a painting, it would be a ghost. Because 9 figures who are not alone, you cannot find that anywhere else in this world. As I sit in this room watching these 9 people, I feel as if I am watching a family. Their family is not mine, but I am in the same room with them. And this, for now, is a kind of kinship." I closed the notebook. I left the museum. It was night. Florence was dark. But then, something very strange, I noticed. Light was coming from some windows. At first, I didn't believe it. I stopped. I looked at the windows. 3 windows, on the upper floor of a building. And inside, there really was a yellow light. It wasn't moving. It wasn't flickering like a candle. It was steady. Maybe a lamp. But how could a lamp be there? There was no electricity. Or was there? I walked toward that building. My heart was beating faster. I realized it had been a long time since my heart had beat faster. And that feeling gave me both fear and excitement. The human heart, I think, wakes up in the presence of another person. Just the idea that someone might be there is enough. I reached the door of the building. I thought for a moment. Should I knock? Should I call out? Or should I leave quietly? Maybe the person inside was like me, skittish, alone, having forgotten how to see another person. Maybe I would frighten them. Or maybe, and this was worse, maybe there was no one inside. Maybe the light was a hallucination. Maybe my eyes, wanting to see another person so badly, were inventing one. I knocked. The sound echoed. In an empty building, the echo of a knock is very particular. As if every room in the building whispers one by one, someone knocked. I waited. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I pushed the door. It was open. I went inside. A dim corridor. Stairs. From above, yes, from above, light was coming. But it wasn't moving. There was no sound. I climbed. 2 floors. I reached the 3rd floor. A door was slightly open. The light was seeping from there. I opened the door. The room was small. A table. A chair. And on the table, a glass tube. Liquid inside. The liquid was glowing, with a soft, steady yellow light. Next to it, a note. I picked it up. It was written in Italian, but only a few words, and I could understand some of them. Algae. Bioluminescence. Someone, a scientist maybe, or just someone curious, had collected bioluminescent algae, placed them in a tube, and they were still years later glowing on their own. They were alive. Their cells were dividing. Their chemistry was working. They were producing light. They didn't need electricity. They didn't need a human touch. Just water, a little mineral, a little light, and they kept existing. I took the tube in my hand. It was heavy, not warm, just cool. And the light between my fingers glowed gently. I was holding a living thing in my hand. Maybe the smallest of living things, but still living. "Hello," I said to the tube, and I smiled, because this was a very absurd moment. The room, a tube, some algae, a traveler. But in this absurd moment, I felt a kind of holiness, because life is very stubborn. And life, even in its smallest and quietest forms, continues. And as long as it continues, the world is not entirely dead. I placed the tube in my bag, very carefully. I wrapped it in my blanket. Now I too was a carrier. I was carrying a small light. Maybe one day I would show it to another traveler. Or maybe I would just take it out at night and look at it myself. Instead of a candle, instead of hope, instead of a friend. That night I slept in that room. And before falling asleep, for a long time, I looked at the light in the tube. Soft, yellow, steady. And for a moment, just a moment, I imagined all the lights of Florence were on, like they once had been. The whole city lit, windows full of people, streets full of voices, a kind of celebration, a kind of life. Then the vision faded, and all that remained was a tube, the room, and me. But it was enough. That night, it was enough. There was no sign that I had crossed from Italy into France. I only passed along the foothills of the Alps. I did not cross the great mountains. I wound along the Mediterranean coast. And one day, like any other day, I saw a different sign. Bienvenue. Welcome. There was a stork figure on the sign. I don't know why. Maybe it was the symbol of the region. The south of France was a different kind of light. Italy had been soft and yellow. France was white and blue. The sky was clearer. The air sharper. The sea sharper. There was a kind of hardness in this beauty. I was approaching Provence, the land of lavender fields. The day I entered the lavender fields, my whole life, what I called my life, this short time that was this journey, changed, because the lavender fields stretched all the way to the horizon. Purple, endless purple, planted in rows, orderly, logical, but still natural. And the season was right. Or I didn't even know what season it was. But the lavender was in bloom. They had stayed open. They had decided to stay open, even though no one would pick them, even though no one would see them. I stopped at the edge of the field, and the scent struck me. The scent of lavender is unlike any other scent. Both sharp and soft, both clean and heavy, both awakening and sleep-inducing. When I drew it in, my head spun slightly. Maybe for weeks I hadn't smelled anything this intense. Maybe never in my life. I couldn't remember. I walked into the field. Between the rows, the lavender came up to my waist. I stretched out my palms, ran my fingers over the flowers, and the scent wiped off onto my hands. Then I lifted my palms to my face. I closed my eyes, and a memory came. This was my first real memory. Since waking up in Istanbul, I had never had a real memory. Only instincts, fragments of knowledge, body memory. But in that scent of lavender, in that moment, a memory formed. Clear, bright, like a frame from a film. A kitchen, small, warm. A woman is stirring something in a pot. Her back is turned to me. Her hair is tied up in a bun. Sun is coming through the window. In front of the window, small pots, some with herbs, some with flowers. And in one pot, lavender. A small lavender. The woman turns. She looks at me. She smiles. Her face, I can't quite see her face. It's blurry. But I see her smile. And she says something to me. A word. Or 2 words. I can't understand. But it sounds familiar. Something warm. A name maybe. My name maybe. Or hers. Perhaps. The memory vanished. I lowered my palms from my face. In the middle of the lavender field, I fell to my knees. I cried. For the first time I cried. Since Istanbul, throughout this entire journey, I had never cried. I had never felt anything like this. A mourning, but without the feeling of mourning because I didn't know what I was mourning. Now I knew. There was a kitchen. There was a woman. There was a smile. And all of it was gone. And I couldn't remember. I had only been pretending to remember. But now, for a moment, I really had remembered. And really remembering was more painful than not remembering at all. I stayed among the lavender for a long time. On my knees, my face in my hands. My crying slowed, then stopped, then started again, then stopped again. The end. I only breathed. I drew in the scent of lavender. I let it out. I drew it in. I let it out. And I made a decision that day. The decision was this: I would not try to remember. Because to remember is to look backward. And one who looks backward does not move forward. But if a memory came on its own, from a scent, from a sound, from an image, I would let it come. I would not refuse it. I would just let it pass, like water. I would not try to hold it. Because the moment you try to hold a memory, it becomes a prison. And I did not want to enter a prison. Even in this empty world, I was at least free. And I would not give up freedom. I stood up. I walked out of the lavender fields. I continued on my way. That evening, in a small village, I slept in the garden of a stone house. The garden was surrounded by a fence, with ivy on top. Inside, a fig tree. A well, a wooden table. On the table, again, there was something. This seemed to be a rule of the journey. Everywhere, someone had left something. It was a book. Dust on top. I picked it up, blew off the dust. French, but I could understand the title. Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince. I smiled. Because The Little Prince, I remembered, or I had the knowledge from somewhere, was a book read all over the world. Written for children, but really for adults. About a traveler, going from one star to another, asking questions of everyone, satisfied with no answer, finally meeting a fox, and the fox teaching him about what it means to be tamed. The fox said, I remembered this word for word, it is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. I opened the book. I couldn't read French, but there were pictures. Small, simple, childlike drawings. The author's own drawings. A prince, blonde-haired, standing on a star. A snake, a fox, a rose, a sheep inside a box. It had to be inside the box because the prince had imagined it that way. I looked at the pictures. I turned the pages. And at one point, near the middle of the book, a page opened. On that page there was a drawing, the little prince on top of a hill watching the setting sun. Somewhere in the book, I remembered this too, the prince said, "When you are very sad, you love sunsets." And he said that on his planet he could shift his chair a few steps and watch 44 sunsets a day. 44 sunsets. In a single day. What a sad prince he was. I closed the book. I put it in my bag. This time without arguing with myself. Because carrying the little prince, for a traveler, felt like the right thing. I was a traveler too. I was also, in a way, going from one star to another. Only my stars were countries, cities, abandoned villages. I slept in the garden. I looked at the stars before falling asleep. And for a moment, just a moment, I imagined that one of the stars was glowing brighter. As if there, very far away, there really was a little prince. And he too was looking at me. In the morning I continued on. Into the interior of Provence. I passed through Avignon, a large city. Once the place where popes had lived. Avignon had a bridge, sung in an old song. Sur le pont d'Avignon. The bridge was still there, but half of it was destroyed. It went as far as the middle of the river, and there it ended. I stood on what remained of it. I looked at the water. Slow, heavy, greenish. Rivers have a different sense of time than people. For a river, 1,000 years is not long. It is just 1,000 small shifts of its bed. After Avignon, I did not go to Paris. It was a decision. Because Paris was a great city. And great cities, for now, would be too heavy for me. All those monuments, those boulevards, those buildings. Reading them alone would be like reading a single prayer for myself. Too big, too wide, too silent. I was looking for smaller places now. Villages, fields, roads. My path led me west. I saw a lion in the distance, from the top of a hill, within a valley, where two rivers meet. But I did not enter. I continued on. I passed into the Loire Valley. I saw chateaux, large, white, fairy tale castles. I did not enter any of them. I only looked from a distance, because those chateaux in this new world seemed to be lying to me, as if they were saying, once there was magic here. But there had never been magic. Only stone, only human labor, only the pride of kings. And now, all three of these were gone. I continued on to the west of France. I was approaching the Atlantic. But first, I passed through a great forest. I didn't know the name of the forest. Maybe Broceliand, maybe something else. But inside the forest I found something. And that something stopped me again. It was a cemetery. Small. Stone. 10 or 12 graves. The gravestones were covered in moss. I couldn't read the names. They had either been erased or the French letters meant nothing to me. But on one of the graves, only one, there was a fresh flower. Fresh. Maybe placed there a day before. Maybe a few hours earlier. It had not wilted. Not yet. A sprig of lavender. And as I looked at that lavender sprig, I understood. Someone had passed through. Recently. Maybe they were still nearby. I looked around. The depths of the forest. No sound. No movement. But someone had been here. And the fact that someone had been here recently, made my whole body tremble like a wave. "Hello," I said to the forest. My voice came out. Dispersed. Disappeared. No answer. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Still nothing. I crouched beside the grave. I touched the lavender sprig. It was still soft. Still fresh. And on the gravestone, I noticed now, there was something carved. Not old writing. No. Someone had carved something into the stone. With a knife or another stone. 3 letters. Oh, man. Elena. I thought my heart had stopped. Or that it had started beating very fast, which is the same thing because both are moments when your body tells you, something has happened. Elena. The Elena who had left the note in the monastery in Serbia. Or another Elena. But a feeling inside me told me it was the same person. Because the world was so empty. And in such an empty world, 2 people with the same name existing would be a kind of statistical impossibility. Elena was here. Maybe a few days ago. Maybe a few weeks ago. And she had placed lavender on someone's grave. This someone's name was unclear. Only E.L.N. Maybe an acquaintance of Elena's. Or maybe the grave was someone else's, and Elena had carved her own letters there. Because she had wanted to imagine her own grave. Because she had wanted her name, somewhere on a stone, to remain. There was no way to know. But I made another decision that day. I would keep looking for Elena. This was no longer just following a trail. This was really wanting to find someone. Because Elena existed. And Elena could place this lavender here. And Elena could carve her letters into this stone. And Elena was alive. Maybe right now in this forest not far away, alive. I stood up from the grave. I took out my notebook. I opened a new page. I wrote, Elena, if you ever read this, I don't know if you have been following me or if I have been following you. But we are walking the same road. Maybe this is chance. Maybe the two people left in the world both have to walk in the same direction, because no other direction remains. Maybe west is the final direction. I don't know. But what I want to know is this. Are you well? That's all. I don't think I have asked anyone that question in years. I'm asking you. Are you well? I closed the notebook. I thought of one more thing. I tore a page from my notebook, and on it I wrote a short note. Elena, I am here too. I am walking too. West. If we ever meet, I will give you a jar of jam. It comes from Bulgaria, and I left it and signed, because I had no name. I placed the note on top of the grave, next to the lavender sprig. I weighed it down with a stone so the wind wouldn't take it away. Then I stood up. I looked at the grave one more time. Goodbye, I said. I didn't know to whom. To the one in the grave? To Elena? To myself? Maybe to all three. I walked out of the forest. I continued toward the Atlantic. A week later I saw the sea. The Atlantic was not like the Adriatic. It was wilder, grayer, windier. The waves were large. The coast was rocky. White cliffs here and there descended toward the sea. I stood on top of a cliff. The wind scattered my hair. My jacket, I had taken it from a village, an old sailor's jacket, flew around me. Below, waves crashed against the rocks. White foam rose into the air. The sea was speaking, very loudly, very insistently. But I couldn't understand what it was saying. Maybe what it was saying was not for me. Maybe it was speaking only to itself. I took the watch out of my pocket. I opened the cover. I will come back to you. Maybe M was also a traveler. Maybe M, too, somewhere in a field, in a forest, on a shore, had stopped and was looking at a watch. Maybe M had also made a promise to someone, and maybe she was still trying to keep it. I closed the watch. I looked at the Atlantic. On the horizon, this time, there was something. A dark shape. Could have been a ship. It couldn't have been. But there was a dark shape. I squinted my eyes to look harder. Maybe a rock. Maybe a small island. Maybe a ship. Was the shape moving? I didn't know. It was very far away. But it was there. And as long as it was there, it meant something. That night, near the cliff, I slept in a fisherman's cabin. The window of the cabin faced the sea. In the dark, I listened to the sound of the sea. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw a light in the distance. Maybe a ship's lantern, or an illusion, or a star that had fallen too low. I closed my eyes. I slept. And in my dream I saw Elena, in the middle of the lavender fields, walking toward me. Her face was still blurred, but she was reaching out her hand to me. And beside me, surprisingly, there was another figure. A small figure. Maybe a child. Maybe the little prince. The three of us among the lavenders were standing silently. We were not speaking, but just being there together, was enough. When I woke, it was morning. And when morning came, there was no one beside me. But something had changed inside me. A kind of warmth. Very small, but it was there. I packed my bag. I turned back from the Atlantic coast, because I had to go further north. Much later, much later, I would cross the sea again. But first, north, because there were other things in the north, and I wanted to see all of it. To the passing of this world, I, as one of the last witnesses, wanted to pay my final respects. How I crossed the Atlantic, this even now feels strange to me, because there was a me on the northern coast of France, and then there was a me later on the black cliffs of Iceland. Between the two, there is a gap, and my mind cannot close that gap. Maybe I found a boat, behind a fisherman's cabin, small, with a motor. Maybe its fuel still burned. Maybe I was at sea for weeks, on the open ocean, following the stars, thirsty, half asleep, half awake. Maybe something else happened. Maybe there was someone else who carried me across, a fisherman, a ghost, a shape. Maybe I fell asleep and when I woke I was there, because in this new world the contract between time and space had broken down, and some journeys were no longer made by walking. They were made just by being. Whichever it was, one day I opened my eyes, and I was on a beach of black sand. There was no one around me, of course, but the sky was different, lower, and there was something in the air. Not salt, a mineral smell, a volcano smell, the smell of burnt earth, burnt tens of thousands of years ago, but never forgotten. I stood up. The shore seemed endless. Black sand stretched all the way to the horizon, and on the horizon, far, far away, there was something white, a white mass, a glacier, maybe Vatnajökull, maybe something else. The importance of names had faded, but to know, or to try to know, was still, for me, a kind of religion. Iceland. I couldn't remember who I was, but I knew Iceland from somewhere. Maybe from a book, maybe from a film, maybe just from someone else's memories, seeping into me. Volcanoes, geysers, northern lights, fishermen, old sagas, stories of heroes and trolls. And now I was there, and there were no heroes, no trolls, only me. I began walking inland from the shore. There was no path, only terrain, bare, jagged, lava rocks, moss. Moss was everywhere, soft, green, a thick carpet covering the stones. I didn't want to step on it, because that moss had grown very slowly, maybe 1,000 years. My footstep would crush it in seconds, and it would take a century for that moss to recover. So I walked carefully. I jumped from stone to stone, touching the moss as little as possible. The air was cold. I took the blanket out of my bag. I threw it over my shoulders. I wrapped a cloth around my head. I looked like a monk now, or a pilgrim, maybe both. Maybe I was now understanding that this journey was a kind of pilgrimage. I had not accepted it before, but now I was. Like all pilgrims, I was moving toward a place. But like all true pilgrims, I was also slowly understanding that the place was not a location. The place was a state, not an arrival, a way of arriving. I walked for hours, maybe for days. Time was strange in Iceland. The light did not change much. The sun was always low, always tilted, always pale. Night was never fully dark. Day was never fully bright. A kind of twilight country. My body didn't know when to sleep. When I was tired, I stopped. I rested. Then I walked again. I came to a valley. A river flowed through the valley. An ice-cold river. From glacier water. Milk-colored. The minerals gave the water that pale color. I knelt down and dipped my hands into the water. It was so cold my palms felt like they were burning. I took a handful of water. I drank. And the moment I drank, I remember this, my body trembled. But a pleasant tremble. As if I had been an empty cup for years. And now I was being filled. The water was sweet. Whether the word sweet suits water, I don't know. But this water was sweet. No carbonation. No chlorine. No sediment. Only water. Maybe it was the purest water left in the world. Because no one was polluting it. No one was touching it. Only the glacier slowly melting and feeding this river. I sat for a while by the river. I took the little prince out of my pocket. I opened it. I looked at the pictures. The prince on his planet was alone. He only had a rose, a fox, and a few volcanoes beside him. Maybe this valley, this river, this pale light, was the place on Earth closest to the prince's planet. There were volcanoes. There was loneliness. There was a strange beauty. I closed the book. I continued on. In the late afternoon, or whatever late afternoon meant, since the sun was always in the same place, I came upon a small grove. There are very few trees in Iceland. I think I knew this, but there were a few birch trees, short, bent, trunks twisted by years of wind. I walked between them. It wasn't really a grove, just 10 or 12 trees. But in the middle of the trees, there was something. A pile of stones, human-made, orderly, stacked on top of each other. A kind of monument, or a grave, or just a marker. Icelanders called these ver. In the old days, they were built to mark paths, so that in snowstorms people would not get lost. But this ver was new. How could I know? Because the stones were not yet covered in moss. And in Iceland, stones grow moss quickly. I went closer. On top of the stones, there was a piece of paper, weighed down with a stone. I picked it up. I unfolded it. It was written in English. But this time, it was not Elena's handwriting. Another hand, neater, an older hand, as if the writer had gone to school for many years, had written with a pen for many years, and knew by heart exactly how every letter should be shaped. Something was buried here. It had no name. It was not a thing with a name. But it existed and now it doesn't. The only one who remembered it was me. And now I am leaving too. If you are reading this note, please do not knock down the stones. Leave them here for a while longer. In the end, everything falls. But leave them for a while longer. Thank you. Henrik. Henrik. Another name. Another stranger. Another person. I read the note. I read it again. It had no name. It was not a thing with a name. That sentence made me think a long time. What had been buried there? A memory? A feeling? A dog? Dogs have names, so probably not. A hope? A dream? Maybe Henrik had not buried anything. Maybe he had just finished something. And he had made a ceremony for the thing he had finished. Because ceremonies are important. Because to really finish something, there has to be a ceremony for it. I placed the note back where I had found it. I did not find a new stone to add. This ver was not mine. I should not touch it. But I did not take the note either. Henrik's note was Henrik's note. Maybe someone else would come and read it. Maybe no one ever would. But the note had to stay there. I thought for a moment. Then I tore a page from my own notebook, and I wrote on it, Henrik, I passed by here too. I understand the thing whose name you did not know. I have something like that too. I have a pocket watch, and inside it there is an M, and I do not know who M is. Maybe M is my nameless thing. Maybe the nameless things are the deepest. I will listen to your words. I did not touch the stones. I placed my note beneath Henrik's note. I weighed it down with a stone, but a small stone, without touching the main structure of the ver. Just with a stone I found on its edge. And I thought, maybe this is how, in this new world, people would reach each other. Notes, stones, graves, words left behind, for unknown readers. A kind of postal system, but with no guarantee of delivery. A kind of conversation, but without order, without reply. And maybe that was enough. Maybe all conversation had always been like this. We just didn't know. All conversations were, in truth, words cast into the darkness. And receiving a reply was a gift, not a right. I left the ver. I kept walking. That night, and by night, I only mean a darker twilight, I found a cave. A lava cave. There are many of these in Iceland. Left over from past volcanic eruptions. Tunnels through which lava had flowed, then emptied out. I stood at the mouth of the cave. I looked inside. It was dark. But I wanted to go in. Because outside the air was getting colder. And a cave at least would protect me from the wind. I took the bioluminescent tube out of my bag. The tube of algae I had found in Florence. It was still glowing. Still giving off that soft yellow light. I held it out in front of me, like a small lantern, and I walked into the cave. The inside of the cave was warm. Warmer than outside. Maybe a kind of memory of heat from lava that no longer existed. Or the heat of the earth itself rising from deep below. The light of the tube illuminated the walls. Rough, dark, reddish walls. Lava drops had petrified, had formed stalactites. I moved forward. 10 steps, 20 steps, and then the cave widened. Like a room. A high ceiling. A wide floor. And in the middle of the room, this is hard to say because in that moment I was truly frightened for the first time in this journey, there was a shape. A human shape. It was sitting. Its back against the wall. Its legs stretched out. Its head slightly tilted to the side. Motionless. Of course, motionless. I approached, slowly, holding out the tube. It was a man. Very old. His beard was white and long. He wore a thick sweater. And over that, a wool coat. There was a book in his hands, open, on his lap. His eyes were closed. His face was peaceful, as if he had fallen asleep. As if a moment ago, a second ago, he had closed his eyes and was still about to wake up. But he wasn't going to wake up. I knew that. His bones were showing. On his cheeks. On the backs of his hands. The skin had long since dried. The skin had stuck to the bone. Maybe he had died months ago. Maybe years ago. But the cold had preserved him. Iceland preserves through cold. I knelt in front of him. Tears did not come to my eyes. I wasn't expecting them. But they didn't come. Only a kind of quiet acceptance. This old man, this old stranger, had died in a cave. With a book. And to me this was not a bad death. Maybe it was one of the best deaths. A cave. A book. Silence. No rush. No shouting voices. No hospital. No fluorescent lights. I took the book from his lap. Very carefully. It was open. It was a book in Icelandic. I couldn't understand the language, But it was an old book, worn cover, yellowed pages, maybe a saga, an old epic, the story of the Vikings. I had started to look for something to mark the page, but he had died. He had stopped reading, and I no longer needed to mark it for him. I read the open page. Of course, I did not understand, but one word seemed familiar. I think it meant one, or alone. I didn't know exactly what it meant, but on that page that word appeared many times. I closed the book. I placed it in the old man's hands. I brought his hands together, put the book between them. Then I sat down beside him. I leaned my back against the wall of the cave. I placed the tube between us, a small light, illuminating two figures, and I spoke to him. I don't know your name, I said, but you had a reason to come here, I know. Maybe to sleep, maybe to think, maybe to read the last page. Maybe you were just looking for a warm place. Whichever it was, you chose a good place. This cave is beautiful, and quiet, and next to your book. The old man did not answer, of course, but even saying this now feels strange, I felt peaceful beside him. As if, for the first time in this journey, I had a companion, and the fact that the companion was dead did not matter, because being dead, in this new world, was just a different stage of the journey. He was a little ahead, I was a little behind, but we were both walking the same road. I slept in the cave that night, beside the old man, in the dim light of the tube, and when I woke, how many hours later, I don't know, the tube was still glowing, and the old man was still there, and I was still there. And for a moment, it was as if nothing had changed, as if the whole world was still full, as if there was a village outside and people in the village and all of them were beginning their mornings. Then I stood up. I packed my bag. I put the tube back in the bag. I looked at the old man one last time. Goodbye, Henrik, I said, because who knows? Maybe he was the one who had built the Vrur. Maybe he was Henrik. Maybe after writing the note he had come here, had taken his book, read the last pages, then closed his eyes. Maybe the nameless thing he had buried was his last hope. And once he had buried his hope, his body had followed. Maybe. I didn't know. I walked out of the cave. Outside it was bright. The brightest moment of twilight. And in the sky for the first time there was something. A color. A movement. The northern lights. Green. First green. Then purple. Then a faint red. In the sky, like a stretching cloth, they rippled, sliding to one side, then coming back, then to another side. They were silent, making no sound, but it seemed as if they were making a sound, because they were so alive. It seemed impossible that they could be soundless. I sank to the ground. I lifted my head. I looked. I watched. 4 hours. I don't know how many hours, because in front of those lights, time was becoming something else. A widening, a stretching. I was there. But at the same time, I was everywhere else from there. I was there. But at the same time, I was nowhere from there. Because those lights were a gift the world was giving me. A gift it had once given to all of humanity. But now it was giving only to me. Or rather, it was still giving. But only I was left to receive. And I received. I received with my entire being. I lifted my palms into the air, like a fool, like a child, like a saint, and I tried to draw those lights into me. I couldn't draw them in, of course, but trying was something. Trying at least reminded me that I existed. And for a moment, just for a moment, under the lights, within the silence, I was truly at peace. Loneliness was still there, but it no longer hurt. It didn't hurt because in front of this beauty, loneliness had changed its meaning. Loneliness was no longer a lack. It was a space open to receive this beauty. If someone had been beside me, my attention would have been divided. I would have looked at them and said, "Do you see?" I would have said, "How beautiful." And in that moment I would not have really seen the beauty. But I was alone. And because I was alone, the lights belonged entirely to me. And I belonged entirely to them. For the first time I understood, loneliness was not a sickness. Loneliness was just a format, a way of being. And some things, some of the most beautiful things, could only be experienced in this format. Maybe God, if God exists, was alone for this reason. Because to create, you had to be alone. Because within loneliness there was a kind of capacity that was in nothing else. The lights slowly faded. Morning was approaching, or the Icelandic version of morning, a slightly lighter gray. I stood up. My body was stiff, but my inside had widened. I took the watch from my pocket. I opened the cover. "I will come back to you. Maybe," I said to the watch. Maybe M will come back. Maybe I will come back. Maybe who I am will return. Or maybe who I am has always been this, and I am only understanding it now for the first time. I have always been alone. I have always been walking. Maybe it's just that before there were people around me, and they hid my walking. Now no one hides it. Now I walk, and I see that walking was always what was happening. I closed the watch. I put it in my pocket. Leaving Iceland I thought would be easier than arriving, but it wasn't, because Iceland did not want to let me go. I can say that. Islands are sometimes like this. You come to them, and they take you into themselves. And then leaving feels like a kind of betrayal. But I left anyway, because there were more places, more things I had to see. Ice was one kind of silence, but the world had other silences. Desert, forest, steppe. I wanted to see them all. I walked back to the coast. I found a harbor I did not know. In the harbor there was a small boat. With it, how, why, with what skill, I don't know, I set out to sea. And the waters carried me south, or I followed the waters, or we went together, water and I, two travelers. Who was carrying whom, it was no longer clear. Days or weeks later I reached another coast, a warm coast. The air had changed. There was salt, but a different salt, a drier salt, an older one. I stepped onto the shore. My feet touched sand, but this sand was not black, white, yellow, golden. And in the distance, no mountain, no tree, no house, only flatness, hot, shimmering, boundless flatness. The desert was welcoming me. The desert at first rejected me. I have to say this, because the desert does not accept a guest. The desert does not accept you. The desert tolerates you, and only if you show enough respect. In the first hours, I didn't understand this. I walked. I pressed my steps into the sand. I acted as if it were any other place. But very soon I understood. The desert was another kind of being. Here everything worked differently. The air was hot but dry, so sweat did not cool you. It only dried. The sand beneath your foot was firm, but with every step it gave a little. It tired you more than walking should. And the horizon kept running away. You saw a hill. You walked toward it. You arrived. And behind the hill there was another hill, and another hill, and another hill. The desert was a place where distance was meaningless. On the first day I counted how much water I had. 3 bottles, full. Maybe 3 days of water, maybe 4. I didn't think about what would come after, because thinking was useless. In the desert, thinking ahead kills you. In the desert, you only think about the next step, and maybe the one after that. I walked. The sun rose, then tilted, then set. I walked. In the late afternoon, because I could not find shade, I took my blanket from my bag and draped it over my head. Like a Bedouin, or a hermit. Maybe they were the same thing. At night, for the first time, I understood the desert. Because at night, the desert changed completely. The heat drew back. Quickly. In 1 hour. In 2 hours. And then the cold, a kind of bare bone-piercing cold, came. I curled up beneath the blanket, and I looked at the sky. The desert sky was unlike any sky I had ever seen. In Iceland, the stars had been bright. In the Adriatic, the stars had been bright. But in the desert, the stars were something else. The sky was no longer black. There were so many stars that the color of the sky had become the color of the stars. A white dust, a bluish gleam, a deep crowd. The Milky Way was not like a river. It was like the place where a river empties into the sea. What? Full. Stretching across the middle of the sky. And the more you looked into it, the more stars you saw. It never ended. Too much to fit inside one eye. I lay on my back. I pushed the blanket to one side, because even the cold was a small thing in front of this view. And I watched the stars. And I thought, these stars exist. These stars have always existed. These stars existed when people were on the earth. But they were not seeing them. Because they had their cities. Because they had their lights. Because they were busy. Because they had lost the habit of lifting their eyes. Maybe all this collapse, all this emptying was a kind of return. A return to something old. People had no longer found the stars worth seeing. And now, with no people left to see, the stars, whether out of irony or justice, I don't know, were shining more brightly. Maybe I was only a witness. Only a witness. The eyes of humanity for a very short time before they closed. To see. To take notes. The stars were still here. Even after the world was gone, the stars were still here. I took out my notebook. In the dark, almost blindly, I wrote, "The stars in the desert are something else. People had forgotten them. People left, but the stars remained. And now the stars, for whom are they shining? Maybe for no one. Maybe they were always shining for no one. Maybe all beautiful things are not made for anyone. Just to exist. Just to be. This is the deepest comfort I can think of. Because I too, if I do not exist for anyone, can still exist. Like the stars." After writing, I closed the notebook. I slid it into my pocket, and I watched the stars for a while longer. Then I slept. When morning came, and morning comes very early in the desert because the sun rises quickly, and with its rising the air changes, I set out again. The second day passed. The third day began. My water was dwindling. I was calculating this, but I was not panicking. The desert has a rule: panic kills, patience saves. At noon on the third day, I saw something in the distance. A silhouette, a dark shape, and around it, green. Green in the middle of the desert. An oasis. I walked. As I got closer, the oasis became real. It was not a mirage. A few palm trees, a pool of water. Around it, a little grass, a little shrub. And this was strange, a few old structures. Mud brick, adobe, half ruined. A village maybe. Or a ribbit, an old caravan stop. When I entered the oasis, I fell to my knees. Not only from exhaustion. With gratitude. I went to the pool. I washed my hands. Then my face. Then I rinsed my mouth. But not to drink. The pool might have been salty. Or contaminated. Beneath the palms there was a well. I was glad to see it. An old well, but still there. Beside it, a wooden bucket. Its rope still sound. I lowered it. I pulled it up. There was water inside. Sweet. I tasted it. First a small sip. Then a little more. It was sweet. Mineral. But sweet. My God, I said, without knowing who I was addressing. Because my faith, like everything else of mine, was in fragments. But in that moment I had to thank something. And the stars were far away. The well was near. Maybe I thanked the well. Maybe the old men who had dug the well. Maybe the gods the old men had believed in. All of them. I filled my bottles. All three. Then I entered one of the mud brick structures. Inside it was dim. Cool. The ceiling was low. Woven from palm branches. On the floor old mats. In one corner a hearth. In another corner a few clay pots. And leaning against the wall, an oud. An Arabic oud. Its wood worn. But some of its strings were still there. I went to it. I bent down. I picked it up. It was light. But gently heavy. That particular weight of an instrument. The weight of the emptiness inside where sound lives. I ran my fingers over the strings. A sound came out. Rough. Untuned. But a sound. A note. And I did not know how to play the oud. At least not as far as I knew. But my fingers recognized something. A chord. 2 chords. Something resembling a melody. Very brief. Nowhere near a tune. But something. I played. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The desert was silent. But I was adding a small sound into that silence. And the silence received that sound like a guest. Silence is not afraid of music. Silence loves music. Because music is another form of silence. Silence's way of singing. I played until my fingers grew tired. Then I set the oud beside me. I lay down on the mat. And I fell asleep. When I woke, it was getting dark outside. Inside the oasis, it was cool. I took some canned food from my bag, one of the last few I had, and ate. Then I went to the well one more time. And drank one more time. The oud was still in the corner. I wanted to take it with me. I didn't want to take it with me. Because if I took it and another person came here, maybe one day, maybe never, the oud would not be here. But if I left it, I would never play it again. This was a decision. A hard decision. In the end, I left it. Because the mud hut belonged to it. It had been born here, maybe. It should live here. An instrument, once separated from its owner, becomes something else. A thing. An antique. A memory. But as long as it stays in its place, it is still an instrument. It still waits. It is still ready to make sound. In the morning, I left the oasis. Actually, I stayed one more day. 2 days. Because I needed to rest. And the water was enough. But on the third day, I had to continue. Because staying was a kind of dying, as Elena had also written. I returned to the desert. My water was full now. And inside me, I still carried the sound of the oud. A very small sound. But it was keeping me company. For the first time in this journey, there was a music. I walked 2 more days, maybe 3. Counting days in the desert is impossible. But at one point, from the top of a rise, I saw something in the distance. A river. A thin green line. In the middle of the desert. The Nile. Egypt. I came down from the rise. I walked. It took me half a day more to reach the Nile. But when I arrived, when I sat down at the edge of the water, I understood that this was not just a river. This was a lifeline. For 5,000 years, people had lived along this river. Had died. Had built structures. Had buried pharaohs. Had bathed their children. Women had washed clothes. Fishermen had cast their nets. Now it was silent. It was still flowing. The Nile always flows. Flowing is its being. But there was no one on its banks. No boat. No fisherman. No child. Only water. And on the far bank there were fields. Still green. Still alive. But plowed by no one. Nature had been left to itself. And when nature is left to itself, it is far more generous. There was a small boat at the edge of the river. Wooden. Empty inside. I got in and crossed to the other side. There was in or beside it. The current was strong, but I was able to cross. I drifted a little downstream, but I crossed. On the other bank, a little farther on, when I came out of the fields, I saw the desert again. But this time there was something in the desert. Something very large. A triangle. A pyramid. I walked. I approached. As I got closer, it grew. As I got closer, it became unbelievable. Because pyramids, I had seen pyramids in books, in photographs, in my imagination. But the real thing was not real. The real thing was a mountain made by human hands, 5,000 years ago, without any machinery, hundreds of thousands of stones. And now around it there was no one, no tourists, no camels, no vendors, only sand, and a pyramid, and me. I stopped in front of the pyramid. I lifted my head. I looked at its peak. It was very high. Then I reached out my hand. I touched the stone. The stone was warm from the sun, rough, 5,000 years old. And I thought, how many people had touched this stone? Millions. From the man who had this built for a king, to the last tourist. And I, perhaps, was one of the last people to touch this stone. Perhaps the last person. And this stone would still be here after I was gone. Maybe for thousands of years more. Maybe the wind would slowly wear it down. Maybe the sun would crack it. But for 1,000 years, for 10,000 years, this stone would still be here. This thought made me feel small. But being made small felt good. Because I was small. And accepting that I was small was a kind of liberation. Because when you are small, the burden you have to carry is also small. I was someone who was witnessing the death of the world. But carrying the death of the world was not my job. That job belonged to time. And time was older even than the pyramids. I sat in the shadow of the pyramid. The shadow was short because the sun was high, but it was there. I took out my notebook. I wrote, I am in front of a pyramid, 5,000 years old. I do not know who I am. I do not know what year it is. But this stone is older than this year, than me, than everything I know. And it will still be here after I am gone. This comforts me, because it means some things are lasting. Maybe I am not lasting, but what I touched is lasting. And as long as I have touched it, a small piece of me, like a small handprint, remains on this stone. Maybe no one will see it. Maybe the wind will wipe it away. But I touched it. I can say this. That night I slept beside the pyramid, on the sand, beneath the blanket. The stars were there again. Desert stars. Crowded. And before sleeping, for a moment, I thought I heard something. From very far away. Very faint. A sound. A call. Like a muezzin's voice. A call to prayer. But it was impossible. There was no mosque here. There was one, maybe in a village in the distance. But no one was calling the prayer. No one was left. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe my ears were ringing. Maybe I was imagining it. Because the human mind wants company. And when it cannot find company, it manufactures it. But I listened. And the sound, if there was a sound, was coming from far away. From the east. Maybe from somewhere in Egypt. Maybe farther. Maybe from Anatolia. When I thought of that name, Anatolia, something stirred inside me. Not a memory, a feeling, a kind of home feeling. Maybe that had been my old home. Maybe I was there. Maybe this entire journey had been leading me there all along. Tomorrow, I said to myself, tomorrow east, northeast, toward Anatolia. And I slept. And in my dream, I remember this very clearly. I heard a mother's voice. "Dinner is ready," she said, in Turkish. And in the dream I went to the table, and on the table was a bowl, and in the bowl, hot soup, and across from me someone was sitting. I couldn't see their face, but it was someone. And that someone said, "Afayet Olsen, enjoy your meal." When I woke, there was no pillow. I was buried in sand, but there was wetness on my cheek. A single drop, only one. Crying in the desert. Crying in the desert is a great luxury, because every drop of water is the last water your body can give you. But that day I cried one drop, and the desert accepted it. It asked nothing in return. I packed my bag. I stood up. I looked at the pyramid one more time. Then I turned, and I began to walk toward Anatolia. I did not know what I would find. Maybe nothing. Maybe, even if this is a terrible hope, someone. Maybe maybe Elena. Maybe just myself. Or a clue to who myself was. Whatever it was, the direction was set. And a direction in this world was everything. How I reached Anatolia from Egypt. Again, I do not fully remember. My body remembered that the earth under my feet had changed, that the air had changed, that the smells had changed, but the days had blurred into one another. I crossed Sinai, I think, then through the old lands of Palestine, the empty coasts of Lebanon, the silent ruins of Syria. All of these places had once been among the most crowded points in the world. The weight of history was here. Now there was only stone, sand, and here and there a bird standing on a stone. One day, at the end of a long day, I saw a sign, half tilted, rusted, but the writing was still legible. Turkiye Cumhuriyeti, the Republic of Turkey. I stopped where I stood. Those words did something to me that no words in any other place had done. They felt as if they belonged to me. Not only them, the earth beneath them, the air around them. As if for this entire journey I had been a guest in other people's homes. You're here, maybe I was home. Maybe. I walked past the sign, and after crossing the border, something changed inside me. My walking changed. I slowed down. I became more careful, because I was no longer in a foreign land. Maybe. I didn't remember, but my body remembered. Anatolia in its first days welcomed me quietly. I passed through the dry, stony hills of the southeast. Empty villages, old stone houses, mud brick walls. Here and there, a minaret, tilted but still standing. One morning, I stopped in the courtyard of a mosque. The water of the ablution fountain had long since dried, but its stones were still smooth, from millions of hands, from millions of ablutions. I sat on the ground. The silence in this courtyard was different from the silence in other courtyards. Older, more familiar. My body, maybe once in this courtyard, had performed an ablution, maybe had prayed a prayer, maybe had listened to the voice of a minaret. I didn't know, but my body knew, and my body was silent. And within that silence, there was a kind of ease. I continued on. The direction was northwest, because I was heading toward Cappadocia. How the name Cappadocia had come to my mind, I didn't know, but it had come, and I was following it. It was like remembering, but not remembering a fact, remembering a longing. A few days later, the terrain changed. The hills softened, then became strange. The earth turned to a different color, pink, cream, slightly reddish. And one evening, near sunset, when I looked down from the top of a hill, I saw them. Fairy chimneys. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Down the hill. Along the valley. Cone-shaped. Pointed at the top. Each crowned with a stone cap. Like a forest, but not a forest of trees. A forest of stone. A forest shaped by volcanoes and wind over millions of years. Nature, like a sculptor, patiently using endless time, had made this. I fell to my knees. Again. I had fallen to my knees so many times on this journey that I had developed a kind of habit of worship. Kneeling before beauty. Not for gods. For beauty itself. I descended. I entered the valley. I walked among the fairy chimneys. And as I got closer, I saw that some of these stones had been hollowed out. There were doors. Windows. Some were 1 or 2 stories high. Some were larger. People had once lived inside these stones. I approached the door of one of the stones. It was open. I went inside. The interior was cool, dim. The ceiling was rounded. The walls smooth, but not by machine, by hand. The handprints of thousands of years. In one corner, a hearth. A soot stain on top. The trace of someone who had once lit a fire here. Maybe 1,000 years ago. Maybe a month ago. In Anatolia, it was hard to tell time, because everything wore down at the same speed as everything else. On the wall, there was a faded image, the remnant of a fresco, a face, a saint, maybe a figure of Christ, Byzantine style, large eyes, bearded, serious. The colors were mostly gone, but the face was still there, looking at me, watching me. I looked at this face for a long time, and I realized how many faces I had seen on this entire journey. The Pantocrator in Serbia, the Madonna in Florence, and now this Byzantine saint, all of them with large eyes, all of them watching, all of them patient, as if these faces were in a kind of conversation with each other, for centuries, between countries, and I had only been a witness to this conversation for a moment. Selamun alaikum, I said to the saint. Then I corrected myself. Well, you are not a Muslim. What should I say to you? Pax ticum, perhaps. Hello. The saint did not answer, but I had shown respect, and that was enough. That night I slept in that stone house. I laid out my blanket on the floor, and before sleeping I took out the bioluminescent tube from my bag, and the room filled with a soft yellow light. Me and the saint, the two of us inside the room beneath the light. I was awake. The saint was not sleeping, because the saint was always awake, for 500 years. And for a moment, maybe in the in-between state of falling asleep, in that threshold between reality and dream, it seemed to me that the saint smiled. Very faintly, maybe just the play of the light, maybe a shadow, but it seemed that he smiled. And I wrapped myself in the field of that smile, and I slept. In the morning I went outside. The valley was even more beautiful in the morning light. The light was touching the tops of the ferry chimneys for the first time, and the stones, almost seemed to be burning. On the other side of the valley, I saw a larger stone structure. The entrance to an underground city, I thought, or a large monastery. I approached. The door was wide, wooden. I opened it. Inside, a tunnel, then a room, then another room, a network. It must have been one of the underground cities of Cappadocia. The Byzantines had built these to protect themselves from Arab raids, then from the Muslim conquest, then from other threats. An underground city, a shelter, dining halls, churches, graves, stables. I descended and descended. How deep I went, I don't know. The light of the tube in front of me, stone around me, and silence. Silence at this depth was becoming something else, almost physical, almost touchable. I stopped in one room. This was a church, small, an altar, a cross carved into the stone, and on the wall again a fresco, but this time a Virgin Mary, with the baby in her arms. The baby's eyes again were looking at the viewer, directly, always directly. In front of the altar, on the stone, there was something. I bent down. I picked it up. A prayer bead. Wooden. Its beads worn, its thread faded, but still sound. A Muslim tespih. 33 beads, I think, or 99. I didn't count. But the tespih belonged to a Muslim, on the altar of a church, beneath a Christian saint. Someone had come here, a Muslim, maybe a traveler like me, maybe another witness of this new world, and had left the tespih, maybe on purpose, maybe forgetting, but had left it there. I held the tespih in my palm. I passed the beads between my fingers, and something surprising happened. My fingers knew how to do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. A small movement at each bead, the gesture of praying on a tespih. My body knew. My body perhaps had once done this. I put the tespih in my pocket. There was still space in my notebook, and in my pocket, Elena's note, Giovanni's letter, the sea glass, the watch, and now the tespih, like an exhibit, or a shrine. A small, portable shrine I was carrying on me, each piece a piece of another person, and I was bringing them together, because now they needed each other. They were all alone. I climbed out of the underground city. When I reached the surface, it was midday. The sun was high. My eyes adjusted to the light, and I suddenly felt something strange inside me. A feeling I had not felt for a very long time. Not hunger, not tiredness, not loneliness. All of these were there, they had always been there. But this was different. A longing, a very specific longing. A longing for tea. I began to laugh, out loud. For the first time on this journey, I laughed out loud. And my voice echoed through the valley, struck the ferry chimneys, came back. Having seen all of these things, having walked all of these distances, having witnessed the end of the world, and now my body wanted a glass of tea. hot, dark, in a small tea glass, maybe with a piece of Turkish delight on the side, maybe a cookie. This desire was so absurd, so small, so human, that it made me happy, because this was proof that I was still alive, because dead people do not long for tea. Tea was the longing of the living. That afternoon I found a village, small, hidden between the stones, 5 or 6 houses, all empty of course, but I walked into the kitchen of one house and on the shelves, I found a tin. In Turkish it said, K. I opened it. Inside, having sat for years, a little dusty but still giving off a scent, was tea, black tea, grown in Turkey, from rice maybe. There was a teapot in the kitchen, 2 pieces, copper, and a stove, a wood stove. I took my lighter from my bag, a few pieces of wood, a handful of dry grass, and the stove lit. For the first time on this journey, I made a fire, a real fire, not to warm myself, to do something. I put water in the larger pot. I placed the small teapot on top of it. I threw a handful of tea inside. I put it on the stove, and I waited. As I waited, I watched the kitchen. A woman had once worked here. I could feel it. Maybe an old woman, maybe middle-aged, maybe young. But a woman because everything was so orderly, so careful. The place of the teapot, the place of the tea tin, the order of the glasses on the shelf. All of it was the trace of a habit repeated for years, embodied. The water boiled, the tea steeped, the kitchen filled with the scent of tea. And this scent triggered something else inside me. Another fragment of memory. A kitchen. Another kitchen, not the kitchen in Provence. A different kitchen. Narrower. A window. Through the window I can see the Bosphorus. The Istanbul Bosphorus, I think. And a woman is pouring tea into a slender glass. And she is handing it to me. Drink, she says. Drink it while it's hot. In Turkish. And I take the glass. It's hot. It burns my fingers. But I don't let go. Because its warmth is mine. Something she has given me. This time I can see her face. Blurry but less blurry. A young woman. Her hair is brown. Her eyes? I don't remember what color her eyes were. But she is laughing. Laughing at me. And I am laughing back at her. The memory vanished. I was in the kitchen. The teapot in front of me. The smell of hot water. The smell of tea. I found a glass. Small. Slender. A classic Turkish tea glass. I poured the tea. I warmed it between my palms. Then I lifted it to my lips. I drank. It was bitter. Of course it was bitter. There was no sugar. But beneath the bitterness there was a sweetness. The taste of earth. The taste of rain. The taste of Turkey. And I sat in the middle of the kitchen. On a stone. And I drank. Slowly. One glass. Then another. Then another. As I was drinking the 3rd glass, I cried. Again. Like in Provence. But differently. In Provence, I had cried for a loss I did not know. Now I was crying for an arrival I did not know. Because in that kitchen with that tea in front of me, for a moment I was home. Home, even if I did not know whose home. Maybe no one's. Maybe there was no such thing as home in the world anymore. But for a moment, for the length of 3 cups of tea, I was home. I took out my notebook. My handwriting was shaky. Because I was still crying. Today I drank tea. In Turkey. In a village. In a kitchen. And this was the most important thing I have done on this entire journey. More important than touching a pyramid. More important than sleeping in a monastery. More important than kneeling in the middle of a lavender field. Because tea was a remembering. Tea was a recognition. Tea was a way of saying, yes, I am here and others were here too, and their scent is still in the air. I do not know who I am. But I know this, someone had made tea for me. A woman. A young woman. Maybe after all this time, maybe you were the woman who made the tea. Maybe you gave me the watch. Maybe I had promised you something, and you had bought me a watch and written inside it, I will come back to you. But no, not you, I had promised. Maybe I wrote on the watch. To myself. To remind myself to come back to you. Maybe this whole journey was about keeping that promise. And now what will I do, Em? Because you are no longer here. Or you are, but I don't know where. Or I forgot where you were. And I wanted to keep my word. But a promise requires a you to be kept. And if you are not there, I cannot keep a promise. I can only walk. And I am walking. I will walk. Maybe that is enough. I closed the notebook. I finished my tea. I put out the fire. Before leaving the kitchen, I washed the teapot. With a dry cloth. There was no water to wash it with. But I wiped it with the cloth. I put it back. Then I put the tea tin back in its place. I wanted everything to be as I had found it. Maybe one day someone else would come, and they too would drink tea, and something would be remembered for them too. That afternoon I left the village, the direction, northeast, because I did not know where I was going, but my body was being pulled in a direction. Maybe toward the Black Sea, maybe further north, maybe just northeast, because that was the way I was being pulled. I walked in Anatolia for a long time, maybe a week, maybe two. I passed through one more village, then another. I stopped in some. I didn't stop in others. In one village I found a library, a small school library, mostly children's books. On a shelf I saw The Little Prince, this time the Turkish translation. I picked it up. I opened it. I read the sentences. I could read Turkish. I already knew that. I was writing my notebook in Turkish, but reading someone else's sentences inside a book was a different thing, a kind of meeting. I read the fox's words in Turkish. It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. I closed the book. I put it back, because I already had a Little Prince, the French one, and that had felt more right, in a foreign language with words I could not understand, because the spirit of the Little Prince was already something I could not understand, and the foreignness of the language suited that spirit. When I reached the northern coast of Anatolia, it was late afternoon. The Black Sea was in front of me. Like its name, black, gray, wavy, cold. Not blue like the Adriatic, not wild like the Atlantic. Another kind of sea, quieter, more closed, as if turned inward upon itself. I stopped in a fishing town. The docks were empty. The boats, some sunken, some still tied up, their ropes rotted but holding. I looked at one boat. The name was written on it, Umit too, in Turkish, hope. And there was no irony in the name, because the boat was still there, still had not sunk. Maybe its name was keeping it afloat. I walked to the end of the dock. I stopped at the edge. I looked at the waters of the Black Sea. On the horizon was Russia, I think, or Ukraine, or Georgia, the old geography. In the new geography there was only water, and beyond the water another shore. I took the watch from my pocket. I opened the cover. I held it to my ear. The ticking was still there. But this time when I listened carefully, I noticed the ticking had slowed, slower. Maybe I had slowed. Maybe the watch had slowed too. Or maybe we were sharing the same slowing. I said quietly to the horizon. I don't know where you are. I don't know where I am. But I set out to come back once to a place. Wherever that place is, I can't go there anymore because that place is gone. But maybe coming back was not a location. Maybe coming back was a state of mind. And I am coming back to that state now, slowly, with a glass of tea, with a tespih, with a fragment of memory. Maybe one day I will come back completely. Maybe I won't, but I am on the way, and I owe that to you, or to me, or to the person, whoever I do not know, who gave me the watch. I closed the watch. I put it in my pocket. I spent one more night at the edge of the Black Sea. Then, in the morning, I continued east, because there was still more road. There was always more road. As I moved east along Anatolia, the terrain changed again. The mountains rose. Eastern Anatolian mountains. Harsh, snowy peaks, deep valleys. I saw Mount Ararat in the distance one day, the mountain I had read about in books, where Noah's Ark was said to have come to rest. Its peak was covered in snow. Plains stretched from its foothills. I stood where I was and looked for a while. Mountains, especially these great silent mountains, were a kind of religion, a religion unto themselves. When you looked at them, you no longer needed to believe in anything else. I crossed a border, the old Iranian border, I think. The sign was still there, but the writing was erased. I crossed. I descended into plains. Then I climbed other mountains. Then more plains. Geography was becoming like a breathing now. Up, down, and I was adjusting to that rhythm. I passed through the north of old Iran. Villages again empty. Marketplaces empty. Mosques empty. But one day, one late afternoon in a small village, I saw a garden. And inside the garden, a pomegranate tree. The pomegranate tree was in bloom. Red flowers, green leaves, and on a few branches, small, unripe pomegranates. New fruit just beginning, like small fists. I entered the garden. I went to the pomegranate tree. I touched a flower, red, like velvet. That life could be this stubborn, I had seen it many times on this journey, but every time I was surprised again. In the middle of all this emptiness, a pomegranate tree was blooming. For whom? For no one. Or for itself. Or for a traveler yet to come. Someone who, passing by after me, would look at the pomegranate and say, "So there is still some left." Or no one. Just itself. Just being. I sat beneath the pomegranate tree. I took out my notebook. The pomegranate tree bloomed today. I have to write this because no one else knows. If I do not know, no one will. A pomegranate tree in old Iran in a village bloomed. No one saw it. I saw it. This, maybe, is what the world still does, to keep itself going forever with beauties no one sees. And maybe it was always this way. Maybe even when people were here, most of the world's beauties were beauties no one saw. Only now it is clearer. Because there is no one left to see. And the world keeps going anyway. That night I slept in the garden, under the pomegranate tree. The stars were there again as always. And before sleeping, I must say this. One of the pomegranates, a small unripened one, fell from the branch and landed beside me, with a soft thud. A sound just loud enough to wake me, but a sound. I picked it up in my hand, in my palm, small, hard, not yet open, but it was a pomegranate, and it felt to me like a kind of gift, like a thank you, as if the pomegranate was saying, "For seeing me today." I put it in my pocket, next to the tespih. The watch and the tespih and the pomegranate, a small collection, a small shrine. The next day I continued east. And days later, how many days I don't know, I left old Iran behind. I entered Turkmenistan, or its ruins, then Uzbekistan. The old cities, Bokhara, Samarkand, I wanted to see them, because these cities had once been the centers of the world, the heart of the Silk Road. Merchants used to pass through here. Silk from China, spices from India, silver from Europe. And here, in the middle of these deserts, blue-domed mosques, madrasas, caravanserais had risen. I reached Bokhara in the late afternoon. As I approached the city from a distance, I saw the blue domes. They were still there, still blue. The colors of the tiles had not faded, because these tiles had truly been dyed into eternity. 700 years, 800 years. It didn't matter. Blue was still blue. I walked into the city. I passed through the bazaar. What? The stalls empty, the counters empty, but the shadows beneath the ceilings, the shadows were still here. And the shadows carried the ghost of people who had once shopped under these arches. The word ghost is perhaps wrong. Residue. The residue of a habit. The knowing of this place that a bazaar happens here. I entered a madrasa. It had a courtyard. In the middle of the courtyard, a water pool, dry, and around it, small student cells. I went into one of these cells. Inside, surprisingly, there was a book. A Quran, fallen to the floor. Open. I bent down. I picked it up. I cleaned the pages, brushed off the dust. I looked at the page it was open to. Arabic. I couldn't read it, at least I couldn't read its meaning. But I recognized the letters. An old familiarity. One word caught my eye, Allah. I read that word because anyone can read it. And then another word, sabr. Patience. I knew that one from somewhere too. Patience. That word had always belonged to me, I think. This entire journey had been a patience. Taking a step after the step, expecting no arrival and walking anyway. That was patience, maybe in its purest form. I closed the Quran. I placed it on the floor, carefully, where it had been open, because a holy book for whomever it was deserved respect. Even if I could not read it, someone else might, or no one ever would. But respect is respect. I sat for a while in the courtyard of the madrasa. I looked at the water pool, dry, cracked, and I imagined that there was water in it and students sitting around it and a teacher teaching them something. Centuries ago. Maybe the 9th century. Maybe the 10th. Science, art, philosophy, poetry, Bokhara had given birth to these. Avicenna had been born here, I think. Ibn Sina, the father of medicine, philosopher, poet. And now this courtyard was empty. No water, no student, no teacher, only me, and I was teaching nothing, learning nothing, only sitting. But maybe sitting was also a kind of learning. Maybe the deepest learning was sitting. Maybe Ibn Sina too, who knows, maybe he too had often just sat, in a courtyard, beside a water pool. And from that sitting, from that silent sitting, books had been born. I left Bokhara in the end, because staying was still a kind of dying. I did not go to Samarkand, it was farther and a feeling was pulling me south. toward the mountains, maybe to the Pamirs, maybe to the Hindu Kush. I did not know. I climbed onto the steppe of Central Asia, and the steppe surprised me, because the steppe was empty, but a different kind of empty, not like the desert. The desert gives you the feeling of death. The steppe is alive. It is just very wide, and within that width people are small. Grass is everywhere, short, brown, yellow, here and there purple flowers, small flowers, whose names I did not know. And the horizon, there was almost no horizon, because everything was horizon. If you stopped at a point and looked 360 degrees, there was only grass, only sky, only you. And on the steppe, for the first time, I saw horses. At first, I didn't believe it, because in all this time, besides an owl, a few cats, a few pigeons, I had not seen an animal. But there, far away on a slope, there were 5 or 6 horses, wild, grazing, their manes carried by the wind. I stopped. I squinted. The horses were real. And one of them, a black horse, black and silver mixed, raised its head, saw me. I didn't wait to see what it would do. Horses in this world had always been wild, at least on the steppe. And now, after people had gone, they were probably even wilder. But that horse did not run. It only looked at me, for a long moment. And then, slowly, it turned its head and went back to grazing, as if it had said to me, "All right, you are here, I am here, we are both at peace." I walked toward them, slowly, very slowly, without posing a threat. As I got closer, the other horses raised their heads, watched me, but none of them ran. The leader of the herd, a large white horse, took a few steps toward me, then stopped. Between us was perhaps 10 meters. 10 meters between a horse and a human is actually a great distance. But in that moment it was small. From my pocket, without thinking instinctively, I took out the pomegranate, the small, unripe pomegranate from that garden. I held it in my palm. I extended it toward the horses. The white horse lowered its head, then very slowly took a step toward me, then another step, then stopped. 5 meters, 3 meters. Then it stretched out its head, stretched its neck, a soft nose, a warm breath. It smelled the pomegranate in my palm. Then it took it, with its lips, very gently, taking the pomegranate without touching my hand. It chewed, it swallowed, it looked at me. I looked at it. And then, and saying this still feels strange to me, but I will say it, the horse lowered its head, like a thank you, like a greeting. Then it turned slowly and walked back to the herd. I was there. There was no pomegranate in my palm anymore. But inside me there was something, a kind of fullness. I had made an exchange with another living being. For the first time on this journey, a kind of agreement with another creature. And the agreement was this: you showed me respect. I am showing you respect. We are both here. We are both alive. This is a being together. I left the horses. I walked for a while. Then I turned around. They were still there, watching me. The white horse again raised its head. I waved. Like a fool, I know. But I waved. It was not a gesture the horse would understand. But for me it was a gesture of farewell. And I continued on. That night I slept in the middle of the steppe, under the blanket. The stars were different this time from the ones in the desert, because the sky was cleaner and the air sharper. And before sleeping, I must say this because I thought about it often afterward, I heard a sound from far away, a whinny, from very far, very faint, the whinny of a horse, maybe the white horse, maybe another horse, but a whinny, against the night. And I smiled, and I slept. When I woke it was morning. The steppe was golden. The morning light was giving everything a warm gold. And on the horizon, far, very far, there was a dark shape. At first I thought it was a hill, then a forest. Then as I drew nearer I understood. Mountains, great snowy mountains, a range I did not know. Maybe the Tian Shan, maybe the Pamirs, maybe something else. And the mountains were calling to me. Because in this world, mountains always called. To climb, to get away, to see. I continued on, along the steppe, toward the mountains. And the days, still days, felt like an inadequate word for a journey that was progressing. Because time was no longer a flow. Time was a place. I was walking inside the place. What was passing was not me. I was passing from one region of time to another region. When I reached the mountains were large, very large. I could not cross them, at least not directly. I had to turn north along their foothills. And when I turned north, the air began to grow colder. Autumn was coming, I think. Or the climate was changing as I went north? Maybe both. I wrapped the blanket tightly. I rearranged my bag. My food had dwindled. I was managing with canned goods I had found in villages, with dried fruit, with a jar here and there. Water was not a problem. On the steppe there had been wells and small streams descending from the mountains. But the cold was a new thing. For the first time since Iceland I was feeling this cold. And I knew that the farther north I went, the colder it would become. Siberia. The word came to my mind. Siberia would be on the way. And Siberia would be the hardest part of this journey. But I was going, because there was a feeling inside me. A feeling that without seeing all of the world's cold, silent places, this journey would remain incomplete. Because the world hid its deepest silences in its most distant places. And I had come in search of silence. From the very beginning. Maybe that was the entire journey, mapping the geography of silence. I walked. The steppe diminished. The mountains drew closer. And through the mountains, slowly, I found a pass heading north. The cold increased. My breath became visible again. Small white clouds. And one day, one late afternoon, I looked down from the top of the pass. And below me, everywhere I could see, there were trees. Pine trees. Dark green. And among them, a thin mist in the evening light. The Siberian taiga. I began to descend. Toward the forest. Toward another kind of silence. The taiga silenced me on the first day. When I took my first step into the forest, something changed. The outside, the mountains, the steppe, the sky, stayed behind. The inside began. And the inside was another world. The pine trees were so tall I had to bend my neck back to see their tops. Their trunks thick, dark, resinous in places, and the distances between them were irregular, but they obeyed a kind of rhythm. As if the trees had agreed with each other over the years. You stand here. I will stand here. When I pressed my foot to the ground was soft. Years of fallen pine needles had formed a thick carpet, layer upon layer. My footsteps made no sound. At first this bothered me, because the sound of my footsteps, throughout this entire journey, had been a sound that kept me company. Now that sound was gone. I was walking silently, softly, like a ghost. And the silence around me was something entirely different. Because the taiga truly is not silent. The taiga is full of sounds. But the sounds are so soft that at first you cannot hear them. Then, as your ears get used to it, you begin to hear. The faint cracking of a branch very far away. The call of a bird you do not know, between the trees once and once more. The wind passing between pine needles like a whisper, but a deep, old whisper. The taiga was speaking. It was just speaking very slowly. And to hear it, I had to slow down. I slowed down. The first day I walked maybe 10 kilometers. Maybe less. The direction, northeast still. Because northeast was going to take me somewhere. And that somewhere was still something I did not know. But the direction knew. When evening came, evening comes early in the taiga because the trees block the light. I stopped beneath a large tree. This tree was different from the others. Thicker. Older. The circumference of its trunk was perhaps as wide as 4 human embraces. It might have been 300 years old. Maybe 400. Maybe 500. I leaned my back against its trunk. I sat down. I placed my bag beside me. And for a moment I just stayed silent. I did nothing. I thought nothing. I wrote nothing. I took nothing out. I just sat. For the first time, truly for the first time, on this journey I made this kind of pure sitting. In all my other sittings, something inside me had been moving. A memory, a longing, an observation, an urge to take a note. Now nothing inside me was moving. The only thing moving was my breath. And the tree's trunk against my back, and the pine needles beneath my feet, and the air, cold, clean air, on my face. And within this empty moment, I understood something. Maybe the most important thing of the journey. I, on this long journey, had not been looking for anything. I had been pretending to look for something. I had been looking for Elena. I had been looking for M. I had been looking for myself. I had been looking for meaning. But in truth, all these searches had been excuses. All of them were stories I had invented to justify the walking itself. Because the truth was this: I was walking for the sake of walking. And walking in itself was not a thing. Walking was a movement inside an absence. A kind of dance. A kind of prayer. A kind of meditation. But not an arrival point. And this absence of an arrival, set me free. Because there was no longer such a thing as one day. There was no longer the sentence, "one day when I arrive." There was only now. And now was enough. Tears came to my eyes. But this time not from sadness. A kind of recognition. A kind of homecoming. Because home was not a place I had already understood. But now I was understanding more. Home was not a moment either. Home was exactly this. A sitting, a breath, a tree's trunk, a silence, and an inner acceptance. This right now is enough. That night I slept beneath that tree. I laid my blanket on the ground, leaned my back against the trunk, and before sleeping I took out the bioluminescent tube. I looked at it. It was still glowing, but its light, it seemed to me, was a little dimmer, as if it too was tired. "Are you tired too?" I asked the tube. "You have been burning for so long. Maybe you want to rest too." I placed the tube beside me. The stars, through the trees in small fragments, were shining. I slept. The next day I went deeper into the forest. 2 days, 3 days, 4 days. I lost count. The taiga was the same every day. And at the same time, every day it was different. In one place I crossed a river, small, beginning to freeze, its edges crusted with ice. I tasted the water. In one place I saw a deer, far off between the trees, its head raised, watching me, then silently leaving. In one place, one morning, I saw footprints. In the snow. Not my own tracks. Bear tracks. Large. 5-toed. They were recent because the snow on top had not yet dispersed. I was afraid for the first time. A bear in this new world had survived. And a bear was wild. And a bear could kill me. But my fear did not last long. Because I thought, if the bear will kill me, it will kill me. I cannot do anything. This journey had taught me many things, but maybe the deepest was this: to accept the absence of control. Being afraid was an energy, and I did not want to waste energy. I did not follow the tracks. I moved away from them. I changed my direction a little. The bear on its path, me on mine. The snow began to fall one day. First lightly, small, scattered toy-like flakes, then more dense, and finally for a whole day heavy snow. I walked. The snow fell. I walked. I wrapped the blanket around my head. My feet got wet, cold, but I walked. That night I had to look for a cave, because sleeping out in the open was impossible. The foot of a tree would not be enough. I was lucky. At the base of a cliff I found a small hollow. Not really a cave, but it was enough. I slipped inside. The snow kept falling outside. I took a little dried meat from my bag. I had taken it from a village, durable meat, and ate. Then I curled up beneath my blanket. And that night I heard something. First from very far. A sound. A kind of sound, but what kind I couldn't say. Not an animal. Not the wind. Like music. From very far, very faint, but like music. I sat up. I threw off the blanket. I turned my ear outside. The sound, it was coming. But it was so far that I couldn't be sure if it was real. Maybe it was inside my head. Maybe I was dreaming without sleeping. But no, it was real. Slowly, very slowly, it was becoming clearer. A melody, or something like a melody. A few notes. I left the cave. Outside in the snow I stood. Snow was still falling. Cold. And I listened. There was music, coming from deep in the forest, from the north. And, saying this still feels strange to me, it sounded like a piano. But it was impossible. How could there be a piano in the taiga? But there it was. A few notes. Then silence. Then a few more notes. Then silence. And then I understood. I knew this melody. In Croatia. From the radio in that cabin. Those 2 notes I had heard for a moment. The same melody. Longer, fuller, but the same. A shiver went down my back. Not from the cold. From recognition. Someone was there. Right now. In this forest. Playing music. I went back into the cave. I packed my bag. I came back out. And I began walking toward the source of the music. North. Walking in the snow was hard. Snow filled my boots, melted, not quite freezing my feet but making them uncomfortable. I passed between trees. The music came and went. Sometimes it stopped completely and I stopped and waited, my heart beating fast, silently begging, start again. Then it would start again. A few notes. A fragment of melody. I walked for hours. Maybe an hour. Maybe 3. Time in the taiga was disappearing. The music was getting closer. Slowly but steadily. And the trees began to thin. I was approaching a clearing. When I reached the clearing, I stopped. In the middle of the clearing was a small cabin. Wooden. snow on top of its roof. From its chimney, smoke was rising. Smoke. Human smoke. My heart was beating so fast that my chest was hurting. Because this was the most astonishing thing I had seen on this entire journey. Not a pyramid, not a glacier, not a river of stars. A chimney, a smoke. The music was coming from inside the cabin. It was clear now. A piano, an old piano, out of tune, maybe some keys missing, but a piano, and someone was playing it. I stepped into the clearing, slowly, very slowly. I did not want to frighten whoever was inside. I approached the cabin. The music stopped, suddenly, as if the person inside had heard a sound, or felt something, a vibration. I waited. The door opened. A woman came out. In her 70s, maybe 80s, white-haired, a small body, wrapped in a thick coat. Her face was full of lines, the lines of a whole life. But her eyes were alive. And her eyes, when she saw me, did not freeze. They did not look surprised, as if she had been waiting for me. We looked at each other. Maybe a minute, maybe 10 seconds. Time disappeared again. Then she spoke, in Russian. I did not understand. I don't understand, I said, in Turkish. She tilted her head. She thought. Then, surprisingly, she spoke in another language. English, accented but understandable. Where are you from? She asked. From very far away, I said. My English, I knew I had it, but I had not used it in a long time. The words came out of my mouth heavily. From Turkey. Before that, from many places. She nodded, as if this answer was enough for her. Come inside, she said. It's cold. I walked into the cabin. It was small, almost one room. A stove, in a corner, warm, glowing red. A piano, leaning against one wall of the cabin. Wooden. A few yellowed keys. A bed. A table. 2 chairs. A shelf with a few books. Another shelf with a few jars, a tin, a little food. And on the wall, there were photographs. Old photographs. A young woman, maybe her youth. A man, bearded, smiling. 2 children. A house. A garden. The old woman gestured to a chair. I sat. I placed my bag on the floor. She took a kettle from the stove, put some water in it, placed it back on the stove. Tea, she said. I could not hold back my tears. I only nodded. Tea, I said inside myself. Again tea. In this world there was still tea. Someone was still offering tea to someone else. She noticed my tears. But she said nothing. She only prepared the tea. And as she prepared it, she spoke, quietly as if speaking to herself, but to me as well. My name is Anna, she said. I have lived here for a long time. My husband and I lived together. He is gone. A long time ago. He was old, already sick. And then everyone was gone. But I decided to stay, because there was nowhere to go. And this was my home. Our home. I could not be someone else in another place. When the tea was ready, she poured 2 glasses. Small, old Russian glasses, with cracked rims. She placed one in front of me. You, she said. Who are you? I thought. For a long time. And then I said it for the first time out loud to another person. I don't know. I woke up in Istanbul one morning and I didn't know my name. I began to walk. Since then, I have been walking. I crossed countries. I followed the traces of people. I found a note from a woman named Elena, a letter from a Giovanni, a ver from a Henrik. I looked for them maybe. Or maybe I just gathered the things that proved someone existed. A tespe, a watch, a bioluminescent tube, a pomegranate. Anna listened. She said nothing. She only listened. And as she listened, she nodded once, twice, 3 times, as if everything I said was, in some way, familiar to her. A watch, she said at last. I took the watch from my pocket. I held it in my palm. I opened it. I showed it to her. Anna leaned forward. She looked for a long time. Then, with her finger, she traced over the writing. I will come back to you. M, she said. Do you know what it means? No, I said. Maybe a name, she said. Maybe a word. Maybe a syllable of a whole life. She looked at me. Watches are strange objects, as if they hold something inside them. Do you think it was a gift? I don't know, I said, but it walked with me, the whole way. And inside it, there is still a ticking, even though the watch has stopped. Anna smiled. For the first time she smiled. All the lines on her face came together, and around the smile, a kind of light formed. A ticking, she said. Where do you hear this ticking? From the watch, I said. Then I thought for a moment. Or from myself. Maybe they are the same thing. Anna nodded. Maybe they are the same thing, she repeated. We drank our tea. In silence mostly. Sometimes Anna said something. An old memory. Something about her husband. Something she had seen in the taiga. And I listened. Sometimes I said something. The tube in Florence, the lavender in Provence, the stars in the Sahara. And she listened. And then Anna walked over to the piano. She sat down. She placed her hands on the keys. And she played. The same melody. The one I had heard on the radio in Croatia. The one I had heard from far away in Siberia. And now, in this cabin, I was hearing it fully. Soft, slow. Only a few notes, but each note was like a world. What is it? I asked after she finished. A piece, she said. Very old. Eric Satie. A French composer. Gymnopédie. The first one. It was my husband's favorite piece. I used to play it for him many times. And now I play it for him. So, every day. But he cannot hear, I said. Then I regretted it immediately, because the sentence sounded cruel. But Anna was not hurt. She only shrugged her shoulders slightly. Maybe he hears, she said. Maybe he doesn't. It doesn't matter. I play. Some things are not made to be heard. Only to exist. I wrote that sentence in my notebook later in the silence of the cabin. Some things are not made to be heard. Only to exist. This, maybe, was a kind of summary of my entire journey. I had walked, no one was seeing it. I had written, maybe no one would read it. I had gathered, I would show it to no one. But I had done it. Because doing was, in itself, a form of being. A kind of prayer. A kind of worship, but without a God. That night, I slept in Anna's cabin. She gave me the bed. I will sleep in the chair. I am used to it, she said. She insisted. I objected, but she refused. You are tired. You have walked so far. Sleep. I lay down. But before sleeping for a long time, I looked at the ceiling. And I thought, for the first time on this journey, I would sleep in the presence of another human being. Months later. Maybe years later. I didn't know, but a very long time later. And this simple fact moved something very large inside me. I had learned to be alone. I had learned that loneliness was a kind of freedom. A kind of gift. A kind of clarity. But now I was learning something else. Not being alone was also a thing. Hearing someone's breath even very distantly in the same room, this too was a thing. And these two were not opposites of each other. Both were real. Both had value. I slept. Deeply. Maybe the deepest sleep since the journey had begun. When morning came, Anna was already awake. She had prepared something for me, bread. A little cheese. A little jam. Apricot jam. I smiled. I had a jar of jam from Bulgaria, I said. Exactly like this. Made by someone. Anna laughed. Jam is the same everywhere, she said. Because everyone all over the world makes it with the same love. We ate. We talked. She told me about the taiga, the animals, the seasons, the stars. I told her about my journey, with more detail this time because Anna listened patiently, and patience is the secret of a story. In the afternoon, and in that moment I made my decision. I said I had to go. Anna bowed her head. She was not surprised. Of course, she said. You walk. You need to walk. Maybe I will come back, I said. I was lying. I knew it. I was not going to come back. The taiga was large. The cabin small. And I was going in other directions. Anna knew this too. But she only smiled. Maybe, she said. Or maybe someone else will come. You came. Someone else can come too. The world is not empty, it is clear. It is just very wide. I packed my bag. I walked to the door. Then I stopped. I turned around. Anna, I said, can I give you something? What? She asked. From my pocket, I took out the bioluminescent tube. The small tube with the soft yellow light that I had carried since Florence. It was still glowing, but dim. Very dim. Maybe a few more days. Maybe a week. Then it would go out. This, I said. I found it in Florence. A scientist made it. Algae. Bioluminescent. It is still burning. But it will not last long now. Maybe here in this cabin, it will spend its last days. Maybe you will look after it. Anna took the tube. She held it in her palm. She looked at the light. Her eyes shone. Very beautiful, she said. A very beautiful thing. You gave me something, I said. A dinner, a morning, a conversation, a piano, a memory that I will carry until the end of my life. In return, this is a gift. Anna nodded. I accept, she said. Then she reached into her own pocket. She took something out. A piece of paper. Folded. She held it out to me. What is it? I asked. Something, she said. Open it later. Not now. Open it while you are walking. I took the paper. I put it in my pocket. I went out the door. I stepped into the clearing. The snow was no longer falling. The air was clean. Cold but clean. I turned around. Anna was standing at the door. Goodbye, I said. I said it in Turkish. She understood because goodbye is understood in every language. Goodbye, she said too in her own language. In Russian. Do svidaniya. I walked into the forest. The cabin stayed behind me. And after a while, a few hundred meters perhaps, I stopped. I took the paper from my pocket. I opened it. On it were only a few words. In English. In Anna's hand. Shaky but clear. When you asked who you are, no one knows. But you are someone who is there. And that is enough. Anna. I folded the paper. I put it in my pocket. Next to the tespih. Next to the watch. Next to all the other small gifts. I walked. And as I walked, tears came to my eyes again. But this time it was not sadness. A kind of fullness. A kind of gratitude. All those lonely months, I had been missing something that had not yet happened. A meeting. A recognition. Being, for a moment, in the eyes of another human being. And now it had happened. What? In Anna's eyes, for one night, one morning, I had existed. And this existence would stay with me always. Because existing once was completely different from never having existed. Once was enough. Once justified an entire life. I walked deeper into the taiga. The sound of the piano slowly grew fainter, softened, then went silent. But inside me it was still playing. Gymnopédie. A few notes. Endless. Soft. Slow. I too was a kind of melody I understood. A few notes. Played by someone I did not know from a composition I did not know. But the melody existed. And the melody was continuing. How I reached Japan from Siberia, this again I cannot fully say. It took months, I think. Maybe a year. Maybe more. The east of the taiga is long, endlessly long, and I walked across it. At some point I reached a shore. The Pacific shore. I found a harbor. I found a boat. Or the boat found me. I set out. I followed the stars. Or the stars followed me. Who was following whom? Toward the end of this journey I could no longer tell. One day, one morning, a very foggy morning, I reached a new shore. The boat stopped in the sand. I stepped out. My foot got wet, then touched the sand. And the sand was different. Finer. Grayer. Volcanic. Japan. Which island it was, I did not know. Maybe Hokkaido since I had come from the north. But maybe another island. The name did not matter. I walked inland from the shore. The fog was so thick I could not see 10 meters ahead of me. It was silent. Everywhere in this new world was silent. But Japan's silence was something else. Deeper. More prepared. As if Japan knew what silence was better than anywhere else. As if silence was the art of this place even when people still lived here. I came onto a road. Asphalt. Unmaintained for years. Cracked. Grass growing through it. But a road. I followed the road. The fog slowly cleared. And there a landscape appeared. Hills. Soft. Rounded. Hills covered in forest. And between the hills, rice paddies. Old, abandoned rice paddies. Their water drained. But still, step by step, arranged along the slopes. A kind of staircase. A staircase made for gods. And in the distance, very far away, a white peak. A mountain. With a snowy summit. A perfect cone. Fuji. Maybe it wasn't Fuji. Maybe it was another mountain. But it looked like Fuji. And I named it Fuji. Because giving a name to a mountain is a kind of respect. I did not walk toward the mountain. The mountain was far away. I just walked along the coast. Because I felt I was nearing the end of this journey. And the end had to be on a shore. Always on a shore. Because shores are where journeys begin and end. Where two infinities, the land and the sea, meet. I passed through a village. Small wooden houses. Slanted roofs. In the gardens, still cherry trees. The season was wrong. There were no blossoms. But the trees were there. They were waiting. Maybe they would bloom one more spring, even if no one saw them. I stopped in front of a house. The door was open. In Japan, the doors are always a kind of opening. Sliding wooden panels. I went inside. I took off my shoes instinctively. My body remembered that in these houses, one removes one's shoes. I stepped onto the tatami floor. Soft, slightly decayed, but still tatami. It still had a scent, the smell of straw, the smell of an old house, the smell of tea. Again tea. In one room there was a low table. On it, a tea set, a teapot, small, clay, and a few cups, rounded at the bottom without handles. Small cups, and a bowl inside which, still, there were some dry tea leaves. Green tea, not matcha, just simple green tea. I looked into the kitchen. There was a stove, old style, a bucket beside it, empty. But outside in the garden, I had seen a rain barrel. I went out. The barrel was half full, with rainwater that had collected for years. I took some with a bucket. I went back to the kitchen. The stove needed wood. I gathered a few dry branches from the garden. I lit them with my lighter. The water warmed. I steeped the tea. Green tea needs less heat, not boiling. I knew this from somewhere. My body knew. I poured the tea into a small cup. I went back to the tatami room. I sat on my knees in front of the low table. Japanese style. My body remembered this too. My back straightened. Hands on my knees. I took the cup with both hands. Warmth filled my palms. I lifted it to my lips. I drank. Green tea is different from black tea. Softer. More herbal. More, how can I say it, more introspective. Black tea connects you to the world. Green tea draws you inward. I closed my eyes. I took the taste of the tea inside me. And I thought about the entire long road. Starting from Istanbul, Bulgaria, Serbia, Croatia, Italy, France, Iceland, the Sahara, Egypt, Anatolia, Iran, Bokhara, the steppe, Siberia, Malta, and now here, the shore of the Pacific, another end of the world. And what had I learned? What had I gained? Nothing in a way. I still did not know who I was. I had not found M. I had not found Elena. I had not understood why the world had emptied. No answers. But everything in another way. Because I was no longer looking for answers. Looking for answers was a kind of hunger. And I had freed myself from that hunger. In the absence of answers, the questions themselves were enough. The questions were friends now. Friends who accompanied me, kept me occupied, kept me alive. I finished the tea. I poured another cup. As I was drinking the second cup, I took out my notebook. There were only a few pages left. Throughout the journey, the notebook had filled. Now I was on the last pages. I wrote, I am on the shore of the Pacific, in a Japanese house, drinking green tea, from the teapot of a woman I do not know, from the cup of a woman I do not know. But that woman maybe had prepared this tea sensing that one day a traveler would come. Maybe everyone always prepares something for a traveler to come. Maybe this is the hidden purpose of life, to leave small gifts behind for a stranger yet to come. A jar of jam, a note, a tespe, an oud, a piano, a tea set. For the people we will never meet, what do we leave behind? I am leaving a notebook. This notebook, I do not know if you will read it. Maybe no one will. Maybe one day long from now, someone will stop in this house, see these cups, and then find this notebook. Maybe they, as I found Elena, Henrik, Giovanni, Anna, will find me. And maybe they will write too. And maybe, slowly, the world will fill again, but in a different form. A world of words, a world of gifts, sparse but real. I never fully knew who I was. But I know this, I walked, I saw, I touched, I remembered sometimes. I forgot most of the time. I loved. For loving, you do not need a person. I understood. Loving is a gaze, a holding, a way of saying yes to the world even when the world is no longer there. I closed the notebook. I placed it on the table, next to the tea set, and for a moment, without moving, without thinking, I just sat. The fog was slowly clearing outside. Through the window, not through those thin paper windows of Japan, but through another window, a glass window that opened to the outside, I could see the sea, the Pacific. White, gray-blue, endless. I stood up. I left the tea set as it was. The teapot, the cup I cleaned. I washed it. I dried it. I put it back. Because someone else would come. Maybe. And they too would need a cup to drink from. I left the notebook on the table, open, with the last page visible. Because this notebook was no longer mine. This notebook belonged to the next traveler. They would read it, or they would not. But it was in the place where it belonged. From my pocket, I took out one more thing. The watch. I held it in my palm. I opened it. I will come back to you. The watch was still at 11:04. Always the same. But the ticking was very slow now. Almost stopped. Very close, but not yet. I closed the watch. I placed it on the table, next to the notebook. I left this behind too, because the watch was no longer mine either. The watch had made its own journey. Maybe someone else would find it, hold it to their ear, hear the ticking, and be surprised. Maybe no one would find it, and the watch would wait there beside the notebook forever. In either case, the watch was in the right place. I put only the tespih back in my pocket. I would keep carrying the tespih, because the tespih was a rhythm. And rhythm, I still needed rhythm. I walked out of the house. I put my shoes back on. I passed through the garden. I came onto the road. The direction, along the coast toward the sea. I reached the shore. The Pacific was before me. The fog had lifted. The sun, a low sun, the sun of morning, was striking the surface of the water. The surface of the sea was shining, like millions of small mirrors, each mirror carrying a different fragment of light. I sat down on the sand. I took off my shoes again, my socks. I pushed my feet into the sand. The sand was cool, but soft. And for a while, for a very long while, I just looked at the sea. I thought. No, I did not think. I just was. To be, at the end of this journey, to be was enough. There was something beyond thinking. Just being. Just looking. Just breathing. A seagull came. A seagull. Since the Black Sea, or even before that, since the Adriatic, even since the pigeons of Venice, it was the first large sea bird. White, gray, wide-winged. It passed overhead. It cried once, that classic seagull cry, and then glided toward the sea. I smiled, because the seagull was here, because the world was still here, because life was still here. Maybe sparse, maybe silent, but it was here. I took the tespih from my pocket. I passed the beads one by one between my fingers. 1, 2, 3. I did not pray. I did not know any prayer in any language, but counting the beads of a tespih, was a form of prayer. Without words, a rhythm, a breath, an acceptance. The sun rose higher. The air warmed a little. I sat on the shore. Hours passed maybe, or minutes. Time for the last time was meaningless. And at one point I thought, maybe I will stay here. Maybe the journey ends here. Maybe the Pacific is the final stop. Or maybe tomorrow I will walk again. In another direction. Maybe south to warm islands. Maybe into forest. I don't know. And this not knowing was no longer a weight. It was a lightness. For a moment I closed my eyes. And I passed the entire journey through me like a film. The 7 hills of Istanbul. The sunflowers of Bulgaria. The misty monastery of Serbia. The white stones of the Adriatic. The sleeping waters of Venice. The olive trees of Tuscany. The purple lavender of Provence. The northern lights of Iceland. The starry desert of the Sahara. The pyramid of Egypt. The tea of Anatolia. The blue tiles of Bokhara. The horses of the steppe. The piano sound of Siberia. And now the Pacific. All of it had been. All of it had happened. And none of it had been lost. Because everything, if it has once happened, has happened forever. Somewhere in the past, eternally, it is still happening. A lavender field forever keeps being purple. A star forever keeps shining. An Anna forever keeps playing the piano. A me forever keeps sitting on the shore. I opened my eyes. The sea was still there. The sun was still there. The sand was still there. I was still there. And for a moment, this was a very brief moment, but it was the most real moment I had lived in this journey. Everything became one. Me and the sea and the sun and the sand. We were not separate. We had never been separate. I had only, for years, for months, thought I was separate. But separation was an illusion. Loneliness was an illusion. To exist was a being together. It had always been this way. It would always be this way. The wind blew, very soft, very gentle. It touched my face, like a hand, like a farewell, like a welcome. I did not know which, maybe all three. I squeezed the tespih in my palm. I let it go. I squeezed it again. And slowly, very slowly, I lay back onto the sand. On my back, I looked up at the sky. The sky was blue. There was not a cloud. Only infinite, bright, soft blue. I said something inside myself. I don't know to whom. Maybe to him. Maybe to Elena. Maybe to Anna. Maybe to myself. Maybe to the world. Maybe to another traveler much later on another shore. I am here. I was here. Being here was good. Then I only listened. I listened to the sea. The waves came. They went. They came. They went. Like a breath. The breath of the world. And the breath of the world slowly became my breath. And my breath slowly became the breath of the world. And between us, there was no longer a difference. The wind blew again. A seagull cried again far away. A wave struck the shore. The sun in the sky moved a very small distance. And I was there. So, always. The fog is rising again now from the sea. Soft, white, silent fog. It is coming toward me. Toward me. I'm watching it. I'm not afraid. Maybe tomorrow I will stand up. Maybe I will walk. Maybe to another shore. To another country. To another memory. Maybe I will not stand up. Both could be true. Both could be beautiful. The fog is approaching. The air has turned cool. I half close my eyes. The Pacific is still there, beneath the fog, before the fog, after the fog, always there. And in the distance, very far away, or very near, I can no longer tell, I hear someone playing the piano. The same melody. A few notes. Then silence. Then a few more notes.